Good evening and welcome. We'll call the Planning Commission for August 24th, 2022 to order. And everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Led by Mr. Setback.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk, please call the roll.
Greenberg. Here. Hicks. Here. Mako.
Here.
Shapaka.
Here.
Siriano.
Here.
Tamarkin.
Here.
Wester.
Here.
Next, we'll go to additions and corrections. We have none. And we'll go to approval of the minutes. We're going to approve two different minutes tonight. First, we're going to approve the minutes for our July 27th meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved by Hicks.
I have a motion by Mr. Hicks. Do I have a second?
Second, Wester.
Second by Mr. Wester. Any discussion? Hearing none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Hicks.
Yes.
Wester.
Yes.
Greenberg.
Yes.
Shapaka.
Abstain.
Siriano.
Yes.
Tamarkin.
Yes.
Mako.
Yes.
Motion carries. Next, we're going to approve the minutes from August 10th, 2022. Do I have a motion for that one?
So moved, Hicks.
Motion by Mr. Hicks.
Seconded by Mr.
Second by Mr. Greenberg. Any discussion on that one? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hicks.
Yes.
Greenberg.
Yes.
Shapaka.
Abstain.
Siriano.
Yes.
Tamarkin.
Yes.
Wester.
Yes.
Mako.
Yes.
Motion carries. Next, we'll swear in our applicants and speakers. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Roth, our city attorney. Before I do that, let me just announce that anybody who plans on speaking tonight will need to rise and be sworn in by our city attorney, who will explain the rules here in a minute. So, Mr. Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are now at the public hearing portion of the meeting. The public hearing will operate as follows. Administrative staff will make a presentation or comment on the application. The applicant or their representative may then make a presentation or comment on the application. Public comment will then be open for 3 minutes allowed per speaker. Additional time may be requested. Permission is at the discretion of the chair. Speakers must complete a speaker slip and come to the podium and state their name. The applicant will then be given 10 minutes to comment. Additional time may be requested. Permission is at the discretion of the chair. If there is more than one application pending for a particular address, the presentation on each application may be consolidated and presented as one. At this time, will persons wishing to present testimony this evening please rise and raise your right hand to be sworn in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, state I do.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. So before we get started here, a couple announcements. Anyone who wants to speak tonight also needs to fill out a speaker slip. They're available over here where Mr. Rubin is going. Applicants, I don't think, do not need to fill out a speaker slip, but anyone from the public who wishes to speak, if you have not done that already, please fill that out, and then we will call your name one at a time to come up and speak. We're going to move through all our other applications first before we get into the Morse Road project. As those applicants are heard, you're more than welcome. You don't have to stay for the whole meeting. You can leave. And for those of you standing, we appreciate it. We've brought in all the chairs that we could. You're more than welcome to take seats up front as our other applicants leave. We will now move to the application portion of the meeting. I'll read them into the record, then we'll turn it over to city staff for a presentation. Our first application tonight is V-0024-2022 to consider a variance application, the very chapter 1151.15 Q4 of the codified ordinance of the city of Gahanna for property located at 861 Ridenour Road, parcel ID 025-005710, current zoning PUD, Ryan and Lorraine Sapp applicants. And before we get into this, let me just announce the Sapps are deaf, and we have sign language people here tonight who will communicate between us and them. So with that, I will turn it over to the city for a presentation by Mr. Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First item on tonight's agenda is a variance for a shed. Property is located at 861 Ridenour Road. We have the location and zoning map up on the screen. There in red is the property in question. It is a corner lot. We do tend to see more setback variances on corner lots than we do a standard lot. Talk about that shortly. The zoning is PUD, plan unit development. The setback requirements for the rear yard is 10 feet. That's what they're requesting a variance from. All the surrounding properties are PUD as well. So they need the variance to place a shed in the rear yard. Again, it's a corner lot, 10-foot setbacks required. It's a 120 square foot shed. That's not really what we're approving, but that's relevant to tonight. It's really the variance into the setback requirement. 4 feet is what they're requesting. Here they have a site plan in the upper left-hand corner. You can see some dimensions here, 4 and 5 feet from the property line. When you start looking at a property, and some of this doesn't display really well on the screen, but right here in the center is the house. Here's a deck. Where they have their fence is pretty much where, from a zoning code standpoint, we would say the rear yard is. And again, that's because they're a corner lot. What we typically see with a corner lot are that homes are kind of pushed back a little bit farther into that rear yard, give them more of a setback from the various right-of-ways. When you do that, that's great for the home, but it makes it real tough to place accessory structures. Again, 10 by 12 shed is pretty standard, what we see here in Gahanna. When you start looking at just how much room on the lot here is in this rear yard, by my estimations, there's about 2,300 square feet, and both of these areas here are technically rear yards, so it's 10 foot and a 10-foot setback. And when you kind of measure that off, that leaves about, that takes up about 1,000 square feet. So there's just about 1,200, 1,300 square feet to place the shed. That does not include the deck area. That's why we see a lot of variances, because folks don't like placing sheds in the middle of their yard, which has that appearance. So again, tonight, what they're asking for is to reduce the setback to 4 feet. You can see they provided a nice image here of where that is in their backyard. It looks like this photo is taken from the deck. You can see that there's some fencing in that location. We have seen a number of shed variances this year. We have recommended approval. I know a lot of those have been approved. We're working on some code changes that might lessen the frequency of some of these variances. Again, when we look at variances, one of the criteria is, one of the main ones, would it adversely affect the adjacent, surrounding properties? This is a shed in the corner of a yard. It doesn't really appear to cause any real negative effects. I know that I haven't received any phone calls or inquiries about this request. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I will turn it over to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Blackford. We will now turn it over to the applicant. Would the applicant like to comment?
This is Ryan, and
Excuse me, will you just please, you got to speak into the microphone so the people on the YouTube channel can hear you, and state your name and address.
okay. My name is Ryan Sapp, that's APP, and I live at 861 Ridenour Road, and we've been living there for 28 years. And we had an old shed, it was over 30 years old, and I decided I wanted to tear it down, upgrade it. And it was, this old shed was right in the quarter of the bends. So then I came into having the variance and have like maybe 4 feet away from the bends. And the other side of the quarter, the bends are an angle. So 4 feet, the other is gonna be 5 feet. So I just want to see if it will be okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You can, no. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this application? Seeing none, we'll close the public portion of the agenda and turn it over for the commission. Any questions comments from the commission? Mr. Hicks?
Thank you. Mr. Sapp. Is the location of the shed in the same place as the old shed?
Yes.
Has the new shed been constructed?
Not yet.
Okay. Can you,
You got the shed already.
Can we just come back? Can you come back to the microphone? Nope, no, not a
We
problem.
haven't set up that shed yet, and it's ready, but you just have to wait for permission.
thank you.
Mr. Greenberg?
I guess this would be from Mr. Blackford. The comment from the engineer talked about if there was an issue with stormwater drainage or public utility maintenance, then it would have to be removed. Is that just standard language or specific to this site?
No, that's a great question. That is standard language that applies to all requests, not just this one. There was nothing heightened about this particular request.
Thank you.
Mr. Shabaka?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Brian, is there a foundation to the shed?
No, this over the other side of Remington Road. Yeah,
So it'll just sit on the ground?
no.
So is there a footing system, a post footing system, something with a foundation where that holds this building in place?
I don't know.
So if we needed to move, if you needed to move it, could you slide it out of the way in case?
She can hear you.
Well, there's going to move, like, we'll put gravels down and gravels and then put it right on top of it.
Okay, so the bed or the floor of the shed, is it wood or is it the gravel?
It's wood.
It'll be wood? Is there any, you've been there for 28 years, is there any water present? Have you ever seen any water build up, ponding, or there?
No.
So you're confident that what you're going to build is going to last a long time, and the materials you're going to use are going to hold up for a long time?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. No more questions, Mr. Chair.
I have a question for Mr. Blackford. It looks like in the picture here, the neighbor also has a shed very close to the fence line.
Yeah, it does look that way.
So,
There might even be another one off to the right-hand side of that shed that looks close.
yeah, so. All right. With that, we'll close the comment portion.
And also, I talked to neighbors, we know neighbors real well, and they don't have nothing to complain about. They did it all good.
Good, thank you. And I will say,
Thank you.
we get into the communications. We did get a letter, or a phone call we got to city staff from Don Coleman, who is a neighbor, who said he has no problem and is fine with the shed, if we can show that in the record. And now I'll ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that application V-0024-2022, a variance application for a shed, be approved.
I have a motion by Mr. Greenberg. Do I have a second?
Second, Suriano.
Second by Mr. Suriano. Any discussion? Seeing none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Siriano,
Yes.
Chappaka,
Yes.
Tamarkin,
Yes.
Wester,
Yes.
Mako,
Yes.
Hicks.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in, and good luck with your construction with your shed. Yep. We will now move on to the next application, which is a conditional use, CU-0008-2022, to consider a conditional use application for property located at 610 Taylor Station Road, parcel ID 0027-000143, current zoning SO, Mercy Adult Daycare Center, Indira Bagagi, applicant. And I will turn it over to Mr. Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next item is a conditional use request, 610 Taylor Station. On the screen, you can see the location zoning map here, this blue line. This is Taylor Road going east to west, north to south, Taylor Station. There's two identical buildings on this turquoise colored property here. These two properties, they're twin buildings. The one tonight at 610, that was constructed in 2018, or went through the permitting process. A lot of the properties you see here on the map that don't have a zoning, those are Jefferson Township, so it's kind of hit or miss if we're in Jefferson Township or Gahanna. But basically, most properties in Gahanna that are on the south of side of Taylor are zoned OCT, Office Commerce Technology, which does allow for similar and more intense uses. Tonight's request, fairly straightforward. It's conditional use within the suburban office and institutional zoning classification to allow for daycare, whether it's child or adult. In this case, it is adult daycare. Again, this building was constructed in 2019. The anticipated uses were medical related. There's 2 tenant spaces in here. I think they're roughly equally sized in that 3,000 range. I think the application talks a little bit about the uses complementing each other. What they want to do is the facility will offer on-site nursing and nutritional services along with recreational and therapeutic programs. Typically, they have 20 seniors at one time. Patients will be shuttled in and out. Here is a aerial imagery. Again, this was constructed in 2019. And I believe they're taking up the rear of the building, I believe, is their portion. I will say, looking today at this request, parking sometimes comes up. They have twice the parking that's required, so there's more than adequate parking on this facility for the additional use. This is what the building looks like from Google. Conditional use criteria. Is it a conditional use of the zoning classification? If it wasn't a conditional use, we wouldn't be here. Is it in accordance with the land use plan? Land use plan, in this case, has it as innovation district, and it talks about all sorts of uses, not really super germane on a 3,000 square foot tenant space, what the land use plan calls for with uses. Undesirable effects in the area. Again, this is really complementary to that existing medical use in the building. Is it in character with the development of the area? In this case, I would argue that's not really super appropriate or relevant in this case because they're not doing any construction, outward construction. There will be internal building permits that will be necessary. But other than that, there will only be internal build-outs, really nothing exterior. Staff, we do recommend approval. Again, it's conditional use, it's medically related, there's medical uses in that area. Building has been built since 2019. I remember going out there doing the Planning Commission inspection. The fact that we haven't seen that tenant space occupied, I think it's always in their best interest to have those tenant spaces occupied rather than vacant, sitting vacant and being underutilized. It's consistent with the objectives of the land use plan. We believe the conditional use criteria has been met. There is one sort of condition of approval. It's really belt and suspenders, and it's related to a building code provision. And that is, staff would request that the condition to approve contain a provision that they must meet building code for occupancy and permits. That's required anyways. However, we've had some challenges with folks not realizing that when you change an occupancy of a building that you have to go in there and do permitting and that. So again, it's just drawing extra attention to the fact that this requirement is there. And again, it would be a condition that all necessary building permits are received prior to occupancy. With that, I will be quiet. Hand it back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Blackford. We will now turn it over to the applicant. Would the applicant like to speak? Please state your name, address, and your relationship to this project.
Good evening. council members. My name is Nathan Yoles. I am here representing Mercy Adult Daycare. My address is 1 Easton Oval, Suite 100, Columbus, Ohio. Pretty much everything, it was laid bare. These guys have owned an in-home adult senior service business since 2013. They're looking to expand their services into the adult daycare space. They wanted a location in Gahanna that they could service. A lot of their clients are in the Gahanna and Blacklit communities. They're bringing seniors in, ages 65 and older, typically be between 15 and 20 people, where they will offer nutritional programs, exercise programs. There'll be a registered nurse on site at all times, as well as a facility administrator and care personnel to the ratio of 1 care person to 7 seniors who are in the building. They know what they're doing. They're also partnering with a national organization called the Adult Daycare Group, who helps with build out, permitting, licensing, constructing of programs that are nationally approved, and so on. So we're here today just to seek that use for this building. The landlord will be doing the build out and the construction. The owner, they're well versed in the permitting and what's going to be required as well. So they'll be doing all the construction. That being said, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Let's stay at the podium. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this application? Seeing none, we'll close the public portion of the meeting and turn it over to the commission for questions. Mr. Greenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In reading the application, there was discussion, I think, by the engineer that sprinkler systems and alarms might be a requirement in the future, or do you have plans to deal with that at this time?
So the building itself right now is a shell with the gravel floor. So it's going to undergo a complete build out, again, by the owner of the building. So all necessary code requirements or anything that needs to be put in will be done by the building owner.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
Thank you.
No questions?
Sure. Mr. Chair,
Baca.
just a couple quick questions. Adult daycare, how do the adults get there? Are they dropped off? Is there a bus going? So they're not, and it seems like there's enough parking for it, but most of the people are going to be dropped off?
I believe, yes, I believe all of the clients will be dropped off. I believe drop-off will be somewhere between 7:30 and 9 a.m., and then they will also be brought back to their homes or residences. A lot of the, or excuse me, like all of the clients who will be coming to this center are already existing clients of the home senior in-home health service business that these people are operating.
So you guys looked at other sites here in Gahanna, or is there anything else available?
Well, there's stuff available. We did look at a site on Hamilton Road, sort of just across the street from Gatsby's. The address is escaping me right now. We got into an LOI and lease situation, and the owner just decided he was going to go in a different direction. We found this site. The owner was willing to build to suit. My guys love the space. They love the idea of being able to build it out to the exact specifications of what this adult daycare building is going to look like, and they fell in love with that.
Looks like a good fit. No more questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shpaka. Seeing no more questions, do I have a motion for approval?
Mr. Chair, I recommend for approval CU 0008-2022.
I have a motion by Mr. Wester. Do I have a second?
Second, Shipaka.
Second by Mr. Shpaka. Any discussion?
I'm going to be in favor of the conditional use. I think, as Mr. Shpaka said, it looks like a good fit. It's consistent with some of the medical use in the area, and yeah, it sounds like a really good fit.
And I'll second that. I think it's also a good fit and a good use of a building that's vacant now. Let's bring a little activity to it, some payroll, some life, and it's a nice service for the city of Gahanna. And clerk, can we please call the roll?
Wester,
Yes.
Shapaka,
Yes.
Siriano,
Yes.
Tamarkin,
Yes.
Mako,
Yes.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Hicks.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Good luck with your business.
Good evening.
All right, next we're going to turn it over to the Big Sky Realty Project. I will read the conditional use and the variance into the record, and we'll turn it over to the city. We have CU-007-2022 to consider a conditional use application for property located at 108 and 110 North Street, lot number 2, parcel ID 025-000117, current zoning OG-1, Big Sky Realty, Mitch Rubin applicant, and V-0025-2022 to consider a variance application to vary chapters 1150.08D2C, 1150.08D4C, 1150.08D4A, and 1150.08D5A of the codified ordinance of the City of Gahanna for property located at 108 and 110 North Street, lot number 2, parcel ID 025-000117, current zoning OG-1, Big Sky Realty, Mitch Rubin applicant, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Blackford for a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Property is displayed on the screen here. Right here, this is Carpenter Road. Property is on North Street, Carpenter, you have Jefferson Elementary, Mill Street, Creekside, Granville Street. I believe this is the first time we've ever had a project in the OG1, which is the Old Gahanna Single Family Zoning District, come before us. So very exciting stuff. So the request tonight, conditional use and a variance. Why are they asking for it? Because they want to put a duplex on the property. Duplex is a conditional use within the OG1 zoning classification. The only other use allowed is by right, and that's single family. Neighboring properties, I'm sure I'll probably, next slide has it, but it's also developed with a duplex, that little section of North Street. I'm sure I'll show it again here on the slide deck. There's some very similar development out there, duplexes of various ages in this area. There's a lot of similarly sized parcels. I know this parcel is fairly small. Again, Old Gahanna, that's our most urban area of the city. Small lot, single family duplex development is allowed by right in some cases. Here's a Google Street View. This is North Street looking north. Here, the area that's in the shade of these trees. This is the section of property that's before us tonight with conditional use. This is on technically the same, but not really the same parcel under the same ownership. Here's a duplex, very similar conditions as what they're asking for tonight in that there's no garage. There's a setback variance that applies to this property as well. The applicant was kind enough to provide a couple of conceptual renderings. I think this is a real-world example somewhere, not in Gahanna, that gives us some idea of what they're anticipating on this property. I want to point out that from a process standpoint, what we're here tonight is to approve a duplex with some reduced setbacks. If those are approved, the next steps in the permitting process is submitting building permits. There are no additional planning commission applications necessary. So before us tonight is not really the look and feel of the building, but again, these are just for some informational, conceptual purposes of what they're anticipating out there. Here is the site plan. There's two lots, kind of. I'll get into that momentarily, but this is the area tonight. This is North Street. The front of the building would be right along North Street there. The parking would be off of Carpenter Road. That is how North Street has developed. All those homes and duplexes face North Street. Parking, for the most part, is to the rear off of Carpenter Road, so they would be following suit here. But in order to fit a duplex, sort of a modern duplex on the property, they do need relief, and I'll go into that here momentarily. But again, the conditional use is to allow a duplex. There's 4 criteria to consider. Is it a conditional use of the zoning? Is it in accord with appropriate land use plans for the area, which I'll touch on momentarily? Will the request have undesirable effects, and is it consistent with development of the area? There are, I believe, 4 different variances required, requested. One is to lot coverage. Zoning in OG1 is 30%. They're asking for 50%. And that is what the land use plan recommends for this area. Front yard setback gets reduced down to 30 feet to 0 feet. Again, that's up to you all to approve or not. North Street is not your typical street. It's not Hamilton Road or Granville or something where there's a large amount of traffic. And I know a 0-foot setback, sometimes we have some concerns with site triangles and things of that nature, making sure visibility, obviously we have to make sure people travel safely. There weren't any comments from the engineering department with the reduced setback. It's not a corner lot, so it doesn't anticipate that there would be any site triangle types of issues if that were to be approved. And the front setback has also requested that reduction for the adjacent property there that I just showed, the brown, go back here a little bit, just to, here the existing brick building. There are some building permits in review. There are some, this does not meet setbacks currently, but when you increase when you reduce the setback and it's already less than what the code requires, it does take variance approval. And so they are requesting a variance because they're putting in some new windows and those protrude out more than what the existing windows, some window wells. And here it is on the map, 13 feet, 6 inches, 13 and a half feet is what those new window wells would project out. So the front yard variance applies to both Lot 1 and Lot 2, and I'll talk about that here momentarily. The remaining 2 variances, side yard setback, again, they kind of showed that here, 5 feet. Don't have a survey, don't know exactly where this building is, but it looked like there was about another 5 feet or so setback, so you'd have 10 feet between structures, which more than meets any building code or fire code requirement. And then the last variance is that the zoning code says that for a duplex within the OG1 zoning classification, you need to have 2 off-street parking spaces, and one of those has to be within a garage. They would like to provide 2 off-street parking spaces, but no garage. The variance criteria, special circumstances of the property, land, or use. Is the variance necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of the property? Would it adversely affect health and safety? So what's unique about this from a zoning standpoint is when we look at this piece of property, it looks as if it's one lot. Technically, according to the Franklin County Auditor, it is really sort of 2 lots. It was split sometime. I'm sorry, it wasn't split, it was combined some time ago. Not sure when. It was not done correctly. And so in their eyes, this does not need to be replatted. A subdivision without plat would be the normal application process. They just need to assign a parcel ID. So after tonight, if things go well for the applicant, after tonight, they would be hitting up the county, getting a new parcel ID, so it would be 2 separate parcels. What they would be doing, and I don't know how well this shows up, it won't show up at all on this, but they're just returning to what the previous lot sizes and dimensions were at one point in time. So they're really returning the property to what it was previously. And again, that's really with the county, not really with us. That looks really weird. Not sure what's going on. There we go. Staff, we do recommend approval of the request. When we look at North Street, there's similar use, intensity, meaning duplexes, size of duplexes, size of property. There is, just down the street from here, there is a property that is identical in size with the duplex, with what appears to be not with the front yard setback, with other similar development parameters. And in Old Gahanna, when you look at the map and you drive around, there are, well, I mean, it's an old platted subdivision. There's units of various ages and additions. It's fairly common to see dwellings that don't meet today's zoning code requirements. So this might seem like there's a lot of conditional uses in zoning, but it's really to make it consistent with the development out there. That's one reason staff supports it. Also, the land use plan talks about the property. It's medium-density residential, 20 units to an acre, 50% lot coverage. And of course, the land use plan talks about basically we're fairly desperate for additional residential opportunities. So because of that, staff does recommend approval. Here is a aerial map here of North Street. So this is the area where the duplex is proposed. Again, when we talk about setbacks, the property here does not meet, the structure here does not meet setback requirements. It does not have a garage. These are two duplexes right here. So just, within a few hundred feet, we have multiple duplexes. This one in particular, this 136, I think that says, and 140 North Street, that is on the same size property as this request is. So again, there's properties here, and I think this was built in 1978, so we're talking 40-year-old development where really the reduced setbacks haven't caused any types of issues, and really what they're asking for would really just make the project consistent with development in the area. With that does conclude staff presentation. I know the applicant is here, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackford. Mr. Rubin, would you like to speak?
Good evening. Thank you, Michael. Mitch Rubin, Big Sky Realty. Good to see everyone again. Just briefly, the duplex we're looking to build is on a vacant lot that even today, if you go back, there's still the foundation from the prior structure. So this has been a previously developed lot. So we're hopeful to move forward with the duplex per the presentation you saw from Michael. And also with the zero setback, I know sometimes that sounds aggressive, but the two properties adjacent to the east are both that zero lot line as well. And it's just, I think it's a 75-foot deep lot, so it makes it very challenging to move forward. And the reason for a duplex versus single family, I'm a long-term investor. We hold it. It's something we keep. And single family, I know you hear this all the time, but construction costs, it's just not feasible to move forward as a single family. And it honestly would be a great lot. And we're finishing the renovation on the adjacent duplex right now, and hopeful to have two side by side.
Good. Thank you very much. We'll now open the public portion of the meeting for public speak. I do have a speaker slip for Hope Dawson. And Hope, if you can just state your name and your address.
Hi, I'm Hope Dawson. My address is 118 North Street. It's that one there. So not that one. The one on the right there. So I'm the contiguous property. So I have obviously I've been aware that something's going to be built there, and that is completely understandable. Idea of being a duplex, again, fits in well with the neighborhood. I have no issues with the garage variance, no issues with the front setback variance, but I am concerned about the 50% on the lot and the halving of the side lot, just because it is a tight space. If I understand correctly, that duplex that's currently there is 30 feet. The planned one is 34 feet. So that is larger than the other one on the other property. And again, the renderings, I realize, are not actually the real thing, but that is a very high, tall property that it's going to stand out a lot in the neighborhood. There are things that are close, but my concern is that it will dominate much of the property and adversely affect my enjoyment of my property to a certain extent. Again, understanding that some property being there, a duplex is absolutely fine, but the variances on the size and the side setback is my concern.
Okay. Thank you very much. If you can stay here, we might have some questions for you. Mr. Rubin, would you like to respond?
Yeah, happy to. You want me to?
Yeah, at the podium, if you don't mind, because we need to be picked up by the microphones.
I was out of town and didn't know we were going to make this meeting, so I was going to stop over. So yeah, in terms of the side yard, I can understand that. But the square footage, we're going per code. It requires 600 square foot per unit per floor, which is how we ended up with this, which just gives us a 1,200 square foot unit. And the height is, I believe, 30 foot or under, which will match up with your property and our property. So that is an actual building, downtown Columbus. Our intent's to use engineered hardy board product like that. So yeah, that height might be a little taller.
Okay. Thank
Both of you hang tight. Anyone else from the public like to comment? Seeing none, we'll close the public portion of the meeting and turn it over to the commission for questions.
Oh, hold on a second, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Shapaka has a question for Hope Dawson.
Chris Dawson. Being a resident, where do you park?
I have a garage.
Do you have a garage?
I do have a garage. It's on the back of the property. I'm actually the only one that comes in through North Street.
So what is the back of the property to you? Carpenter?
Yes.
And your garage is facing Carpenter?
My garage faces North Street. I'm a bit
Faces North
unusual
Street.
in that. My house is old.
Mr. Blackford, can you point out which one she's talking about here?
Looks like there's a
Is she to
driveway
the
between the
east? She's to
two.
the east of the lot?
Right there, yes.
Is there so you drive from the north all the way to the back?
Yes.
Is there a preference as we move this project forward? I just want to get a feel for the parking and the kids, the school, the traffic in the back. Looks like what was being proposed was the garage was going to face Carpenter.
Yes.
Is that a hazard in your mind, or what, do you have an opinion on that?
I don't think so. As they noted, the duplex already there has a parking lot. I think actually you access from Short Street, but it's right off of Carpenter. The two properties to the east of, or north, yeah, east of mine, both have garages that access onto from Carpenter.
And how
I mean, the
long-
traffic on Carpenter there does get pretty backed up at the certain times of day, but there's already two as a precedent.
So how long have you been a resident there?
I've been 7 years.
Have you seen any accidents there, anybody backing up and taking anybody?
No.
No? Well, thank you for your comments.
I have a couple, Mr. Rubin, question for you. So explain the zero setback in the front. Are you going to build right, will the patio or the front
So that's-
porch come right to the sidewalk?
Correct. Yeah, so it's an 8-foot front porch. So the front porch would essentially, or the step would come to that setback, which is in line with the adjacent properties. It's similar to how their porches are.
And then there'll be two doors off the front porch for the, to the left and to the right.
intent is to build almost an identical building to what we showed conceptually.
Okay. All right, with no additional questions, do I have a motion?
I have two questions.
Oh, Mr. Surin has two
Yeah.
questions, I'm sorry.
Mr. Rubin, I think one thing that's deceiving when we talk about zero lot is where the right-of-way sits. And so I'm just curious, roughly how, I know there's not a curb, but how far is the right-of-way off the line of the street?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that is why zero lot line on this property in particular sounds aggressive, but when you look at the Otter site, or, I mean, you're still, if, from that aerial there, if Hope's property there, that's essentially, she's basically at the right-of-way.
Okay, so the property, potentially, the conceptual property, I know this isn't a final development plan, but would be aligned with her house?
Correct.
Okay. And then, do you happen to know on Lot 1 what the current side yard setback is from
Yeah.
the lot line?
We had printer issues, so I took a couple screenshots of the survey. And I believe 7 foot.
So you're requesting a 5-foot setback from on your western edge or off of Lot 1, which would put the distance between the two properties at 12-ish feet. Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Mako?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. It was stated, I believe, in the longer in the presentation, that there was some type of structure there before. Do we happen to know what that was?
You know, I worked on that. I was hoping to find out it was a duplex to present to you guys, but I had a tough time finding out. But I mean, even there, you can see the line of the old foundation and the old sidewalk. Talking to John Moorhead before he left, there's even still a sanitary and water tap for that property.
Ms. Dawson might know the answer to this question.
I did speak speak with the previous owner, not the immediately previous to me, but Becky Kidwell, whose family had lived in that house for about 50, 60 years before she sold it in early 2000s. It was a single-family home. Apparently, there was an original plan when they built the first duplex to do two. She wasn't sure why the second one never happened, which would have matched the two at the other end of the street. So that's my understanding, not official, but from Becky Kidwell.
Thank you.
No other questions.
Mr. Greenberg?
Just a quick reiteration, I guess, to Mr. Blackford, that this would not come back to the Planning Commission for design review.
That is correct.
Because we do not see
So
residential.
we don't see residential, right?
Do not see duplexes in single family, correct?
Right. Just wanted
Yeah,
everybody to
single-family
know that.
duplexes.
Yeah.
I am comfortable committing to not using vinyl, if that's helpful.
We'll let you work that out with the city. All right, now do I have a motion for approval?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve item CU-0007-2022.
I have a motion by Mr. Suriano. Do I have a second?
Second by Hicks.
Second by Mr. Hicks. Any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call a roll.
Suriano,
Yes.
Hicks,
Yes.
Tamarkin,
Yes.
Wester,
Yes.
Mako,
Yes.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Chappaka.
Yes.
Thank you.
Conditional use passes. Now we'll do a vote for the variance. 4 variances that we're going to be voting on tonight. Do I have a motion for the variances?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve item V-0025-2022.
I have a motion by Mr. Suriano. Do I have a second?
Second, Greenberg.
Second by Mr. Greenberg. Any discussion on the variances?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of the parking and being off of just the look of it, I think design-wise, we can get that inside. And so I'm not in favor at the moment of the variance for this. I think there's an opportunity to get your cars inside instead of leaving them parked out, and possibly put a roof deck up there so you can watch some ball games for the tenants. Consideration, and unfortunately, if you told me you could do that, I'm looking at a variance here to have on-street parking, so I'm declining. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chappaka.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to be in favor of the variances. I think the density, height, use intensity is consistent with the land use plan. It's good to see residential be kind of infill, kind of our old Gahanna urban fabric, and I think it's consistent with what's around it and what was there before it, so I'm in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Suriano. Mr. Mako?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, I'm going to be voting in favor of this. One of the things I always like to see, as Mr. Suriano had said, is infill development. I think that we need to get as many residents as, conceivably possible down in the Creekside area, just to keep that whole area viable. And I think just my gut feeling is that this is going to do well, because there's definitely a market for that. So, again, I'm going to be voting in favor of this.
Thank you, Mr. Mako.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hicks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also be in favor, it does seem like a lot of variances, but this is a unique area. I agree with the comments made by my colleagues. It is a good use in this area. It does fit in, and I feel it does meet the criteria for granting the variances in this instance. I know Mr. Rubin has another project in this area that it does well. He has another one that's proposed on the west side that we're looking forward to seeing. So I'll definitely be in support of this one.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. And with that, do I have a motion?
Where are we
All right,
at?
we did the motion.
We did that.
Can we take a vote? Call the roll.
Suriano,
Yes.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Wester,
Yes.
Mako,
Yes.
Hicks,
Yes.
Chappaka,
No.
Tamarkin.
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Rubin. We
Thank
look
you.
forward to your development.
Appreciate it.
And thank you, Ms. Dawson, for coming out to speak today. All right, next we are going to go to the Morse Road project, which I think is why everyone is here. We do have a few empty seats up front now. I see 3, if anyone would like to move up. And Again, I just ask for everybody's respect to follow the rules of the commission. I'll speak to those as we move through it, and any comments that are made that are not made directly into the microphone are not picked up on the minutes and are not picked up on the YouTube, which is being broadcast live. We do have a timer here, so when it comes down to public speaking, everyone will get 3 minutes, and we'll talk to that in a few minutes, and we'll ask that you abide by that. I think we have a lot of speakers tonight. First, I'm going to read it into the record. We have Z-0001-2022 to recommend approval to council a zoning application for 13.96 plus or minus acres of property located at 5503 Morse Road, parcel ID 025-011219, current zoning ER-1, proposed zoning MFRD, project Morse Road 14, Scott Harper applicant. We have CU-0006-2022 to consider a conditional use application for property located at 5503 Morse Road, parcel ID 025-011219, current zoning MFRD, project Morse Road 14, Scott Harper applicant, and V-0023-2022 to consider a variance application to vary chapters 1149.03B1 and 2, 1149.03I5 and 1169.05A of the codified ordinance of the City of Gahanna for property located at 5503 Morse Road, parcel ID 025-011219, current zoning MFRD, project Morse Road 14, Scott Harper applicant, and I will turn it over to Mr. Blackford for a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On your screens, for your viewing pleasure, is the location and zoning map. Here where my cursor is, this is Morse Road. That is the northern limits, City of Gahanna. So any development you see to the north of Morse Road is in the City of Columbus. On the left-hand, the left-hand side of the screen, Hamilton Road. Over here is a roundabout, Morse Road, Johnstown Road, Barnes right here. Right here, this is the Story Point Senior Living Facility, which was built in 2015. This is Sage Park, another assisted living memory care facility that was built around the same time. The current zoning of the property is estate residential. That is a large lot zoning classification that allows for much more than just single-family development. It also allows for agricultural uses, including harboring farm animals, stables, kennels, vets, things of that nature. All the property, well, not all the property, but much of the property here you see to the south, you don't see for some reason, zoning layer doesn't have a color. That means one of two things. It's either zoned MFRD or it's not in City Gahanna. In this case, right here, like these properties, these are all Jefferson Township. These properties right in here are all zoned multifamily residential district, which is what really we're here to talk about tonight. So there's 3 different applications. The main application is the rezoning. If the rezoning is not successful, then there's really no need for a conditional use and variance because they're related to the multifamily development. So the rezoning from estate residential, again, which is more than just residential, to MFRD, which is our multifamily residential district. Multifamily residential district, only use allowed by right, is multifamily. Just under 14 acres, 251 units, which puts the density right at the limit of the zoning code, just under 18 units per acre. One thing that maybe Planning Commission has seen recently in the last couple of years is when we rezone to multifamily, as part of that multifamily rezoning request, there is a requirement for on-site land dedication or park fees in lieu of on-site land dedication. A couple of our previous projects, they asked for a variance from this request. Some other ones maybe weren't so fortunate. This is our first project that's actually going through, first project that I've worked on in 8.5 years, going through the rezoning process and contributing to the land dedication. So what that land dedication looks like, well, ultimately, it's up to Planning Commission to say yay or nay on land dedication or fees in lieu. What the code says is that myself, the Director of Parks and Recreation, and the Parks and Rec Board provide a recommendation as to whether we'd rather see on-site land dedication or fees in lieu. And it's resounding, we'd rather have fees in lieu. The land use plan doesn't go into a whole bunch of detail on parkland and making recommendations there. It does recognize that Gahanna has 2.5 times the national average of parkland space per resident, per population than the national average. And the land use plan really emphasizes that we need additional residential. So again, staff, Parks Board, all would say land dedication is not necessary, but fees in lieu. How that code works, it's based on the number of units, the size of the project. There's a projected population, all outlined in code, 25% of the site. What the value of that? They went through an appraisal. Based on the appraisal, $175,001 would be required if this ends up going through and being approved. Conditional use, a lot of conditional uses. This is typical with developments within the MFRD zoning. Why is that? Because the MFRD zoning is unique and that a lot of the development standards in there are conditional uses. So there are basically 2 or 3 other zoning classifications that allow for multifamily. Gahanna allows for 1, PUD allows for 1. We have something called like CX1 that allows for it. If they were doing multifamily in one of those districts, they wouldn't need all the conditional uses because again, it's just the MFRD category that has some of them up on their screen, which is more than 8 units in a building. Again, that's not always the case, but very common that multifamily projects have more than 8 units. Again, that's not a variance, that's a conditional use. That's just a heightened review with Planning Commission. More than 1 building on a lot. Pretty much every multifamily project out there with more than 1 building are going to have more than 1 building on a lot. That's pretty common. Density up to 18 units. Again, that's not a variance, but a conditional use. Height exceeding 2 stories. 2 stories is allowed by right to go above that. It's conditional use. Flexible arrangement of buildings, meaning if they, it doesn't even require a variance, but then for them just to put buildings on the property, technically that's a conditional use. And then your accessory buildings. So if you want a pool and a clubhouse, garages, all those are accessory buildings which require a conditional use. There are 3 variance requests. The first one is to lot width. This is again a unique requirement of the MFRD zoning classification. What the code says is that you need to have lot width based on the number of units. So far, every multifamily project I've worked on has needed a variance from this request. I'm not really sure 100% what the logic is behind this requirement other than they don't want to see overcrowding. But MFRD does have other rules and regulations to kind of prevent overdevelopment. Some of them, like height, things of that nature. There's also a 25-foot building setback, which isn't what we're here to talk about tonight, but those are requirements. Their site plan does show that being met. There's also a 15-foot buffer that's required adjacent to residential. There's also a 15% open space requirement. So again, when staff looks at this variance, again, professional opinion is that it's probably in there to prevent some type of overcrowding and that, but there's a lot of other measures that they will have to meet as they go through the development process to ensure that there's not the overcrowding. Another unique provision of the MFRD zoning code is that no parking is allowed within 25 feet of a building. Not sure why. This is the only zoning where that's a requirement. Other zonings actually say you can't have parking within such a distance. They actually want the parking to be closer to the building. So that's why you see this. And then really the third one is really staff's recommendation. So the code says when we grant a conditional use, you have 1 year to obtain a zoning certificate. A zoning certificate is obtained through the building permit process. The rezoning process typically takes roughly at least 6 months. Conditional use, variance, typically go with the rezoning. If the rezoning is successful, it goes on to city council. Then they come back before you for final development plan, design review. Then they go through an engineering and building process. All that to say is it typically takes well over a year before they can obtain those building permits. So this is actually going to be a code adjustment that staff will be writing or has written and will be presenting to you shortly. And again, that's so they have 2 years to get their building permit. So they don't have to come back before you for another conditional use for everything that you see here. Here is the site plan that they provided within their application. It's really conceptual, informational purposes at this point in time. Rezonings don't adopt a site plan. Top of your screen, this is north, this is Morse Road. You can see 2 access points. I believe this one to the east lines up with the development across the street in Columbus. There was some traffic analysis that was done as part of the rezoning, and the report did indicate that 2 turn lanes are required. A right turn lane as you're going eastbound, and you can see that here on the plan, and then a left turn lane, in this area, left turn lane as you're going westbound. Again, so tonight, this is really just for informational purposes. This shows where the buildings probably will be located, but again, that's a different application and procedure. Retention ponds, parking, all interior. There is a 25-foot setback shown on the site plan. That is a code requirement, 25 feet within the MFR district for your front, sides, and rears yards, and they show that they can meet that and still have sufficient parking and everything else necessary. Land use plan. Land use plan talks a lot about rezoning and future use of property. The land use plan designates this property mixed-use district. What does that mean? Mixed-use district does not mean a mix of uses in a vertical. Every single project has to have a mixed use. It does talk about a mix of uses within that geographic area. So again, there's not a requirement for this property to have a mix of uses. It does say and sort of recommend up to 70 feet building height, 30 units per acre. Land use plan goes into great detail about our existing housing stock. 90% of the units were built before the year 2000. Lots changed in 20 plus years. The housing stock in Gahanna is dated. And one thing that is linked together is housing opportunities and jobs. You don't have one without another. It's never been more true than it is today. So, you can't have jobs without the housing that the workforce needs. The land use plan identified that we are Gahanna, which is typical of suburban communities of this age. The housing preferences have changed. It's a more transient population. A lot of folks are renters by choice. When you're a renter by choice, you want to have certain amenities and features that, quite honestly, the age of a lot of our multifamily projects don't necessarily have. So that's all part of that land use plan there, again, with the need for additional housing. Again, the plan does not specifically talk about park land and fees in lieu, but it does say basically Gahanna is very rich in park space. We have more park land than we do mixed use, commercial and office combined. So we do need other types of uses in that. So again, that's one reason staff does recommend the fees in lieu rather than the on-site dedication. Land use plan, unlike zoning code, it's a guide. It's meant to guide decision-making process, especially what we're here for tonight. It doesn't mandate any one particular decision. Next steps, I kind of talked about this a little bit. I'm going to go in a little bit more detail. So with a rezoning planning commission, you can recommend approval, but you can't approve. If you do recommend approval, the rezoning goes on to city council for a vote. If it gets approved through city council, and then we'll see applications we're more used to seeing. That's a final development plan, an FDP, and a design review, DR application. What those applications do is we kind of saw the site plan there. That's really what a final development plan is. It'll formalize what those setbacks are, where the buildings are located, retention, parking areas, things of that nature. The design review goes into detail about landscaping, lighting, building materials, and building colors. So again, that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. That would be at a future point in time if the rezoning is successful. If the application is denied, when I say the application, the rezoning application is denied by Planning Commission, you have the power to kill a rezoning, but not to give it life. So if it is denied, that is the end of the project. Rezoning criteria, there's 6 different criteria to consider with a rezoning request. There's a couple that staff typically focus on, because I think when we talk about rezonings, sort of the main thing we typically, I think, city planners tend to look at is the consistency and compatibility of the request with what's out there. Let's see here. And if we look at another map of the area, and we want to talk about just how consistent is the request to rezone the property to MFRD, this is zoomed out, or maybe a little bit zoomed out of what the previous map had. This is in the city what's referred to as the North Triangle. This is just a portion of it. Again, the North Triangle, the north side boundary is Morse Road. East boundary is Johnstown Road, 62, and then to the west is Hamilton Road, and it really goes south to where the intersection is of Hamilton and Johnstown Road there. But just looking at the screen right here, if we add up roughly all the different properties that you see on the screen besides just the adjacent properties, but what you see on your screen, there's over 100 acres of MFRD. That does not include the property to the north in the city of Columbus. That is all similarly developed. So again, the rezoning criteria, a lot consistency with the goals of the land use plan, talked about that. Compatibility with what they want to do with what's out there. In staff's mind, this is very consistent with how that area has developed. Capacity of infrastructure, you have a traffic impact study that was done that identified that there's adequate capacity on the roads, but turn lanes are required. Apparent demand for permitted uses, certainly in my time here with the city, which is 8.5 years, the #1 use, especially in the last few years, that we get calls for by far and away is multifamily development. We'd have much more of it if we had the land. We just don't have much land, certainly not property of this size. So there is an extreme amount of demand with minimal amounts of available properties. Conditional use, I know we've already talked about that, but we'll cover it again. When we evaluate a conditional use, is it a conditional use of the zoning? Would it be in accord with the land use plan? Would it have undesirable effect on the surrounding area? Is it consistent with land use character? And luckily, it's up to you all and not me to determine whether or not it would have undesirable effects on the property. But I would just point out that undesirable effects, when we look at the criteria for a conditional use and a rezoning, doesn't necessarily mean identical. Just because something's not identical to what's out there and built does not mean that it's not compatible. Every town and city in this country has buildings of various heights. There is no planning principle that I'm aware of that says 3 stories next to 2 stories is not compatible. So again, staff does find this to be compatible. Variance criteria, special circumstances or conditions applying to land, building, or use. Is the variance necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of property rights? Would the variance adversely affect health, safety? Staff comments. We do recommend approval of all 3 applications as presented. We find it consistent with the land use plan. Again, land use plan, in theory, it doesn't say that you can have up to 70 feet. It doesn't say that you can, as by right, have up to 30 units. It just says in theory, in some places, this may be appropriate. Again, what they're asking for, basically 18 units to an acre. That's fairly consistent with some development in the area, not all of it. But again, that's fairly consistent with what we've seen here lately. And staff would certainly say that really the zoning that's not appropriate is the existing zoning, the ER1. This area's developed a lot, just in my time with the city, and obviously it's developed quite a bit over the decades. Again, estate residential is not just McMansions. It's agricultural uses, and in Gahanna, the residential zonings are much more permissible when it comes to land clearing and things of that nature. So I know there's some concerns, rightfully so, about maybe clearing of land and that. Again, those things can happen right now under the current zoning and that. So it's not like if this doesn't develop, it's always going to be treed. They have rights to remove some trees and do some things of that nature. And I will point out that if there are some considerations, maybe we want to condition something after all the testimony. Conditional uses and variances can have conditions, rezonings cannot. So if you wanted to condition a conditional use, specifically the code even talks about, height, landscaping, things of that nature. If that's something Planning Commission wants to consider, that certainly can be made as part of any motion. And again, the conditional use and variance are Planning Commission decisions. None of that goes on to City Council. Again, that's kind of unique. Planning Commission kind of approves the fees in lieu or on-site land dedication, since the application is for fees in lieu, unless you made a motion where you said you wanted on-site land dedication, it would be the fees in lieu instead of land dedication. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blackford. Appreciate the very thorough presentation. We'll now turn it over to the applicant. Would the applicant like to speak? Jen, state your name, address, and relationship to the project.
Good evening. My name is Doug Irvin. I'm in the planning department at the Stonehenge Company. I'm at 147 North High Street, Gahanna, 43230. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak this evening about our proposed rezoning on Morse Road. First, I want to acknowledge some of my development team members that are here this evening. Andy Gardner is our engineer. Edwin Douglas is one of my colleagues at Stonehenge, and Mr. Scott Harper is our architect. He's here as well to be able to respond to any questions. Mr. Blackford spent a lot of time going through a lot of what we've been working through with our various iterations of our application and how to develop this site. Stonehenge is not a stranger to this community. We're headquartered here. It's where our corporate headquarters is. We've developed a lot of real estate here, and we're people that build things and keep them. And I think that's really important, because we are true community stakeholders, and we're very compassionate about our community. As Mr. Blackford did point out, with the land use plan, which is a guide, but nonetheless with the land use plan, planners had initially looked at this site as with perhaps a more intense use than what we've proposed. The use we proposed is consistent with what we currently have at the park. And we have provided some fact sheets about park that were, I believe, distributed by the clerk late today.
Actually, we did not distribute it. We have them up on the screen here.
Okay.
So if
Yeah,
you
here
would
we
like
go.
to speak
That's
to those.
that's even better.
Yes, we wanted everybody to be able to see them.
Sorry, the microphone's not like a good eye for me. Well, with respect to the park, it's been here since 2017.
And where is the park?
It's on Hamilton Road, directly across from the former Northeast School.
Okay.
And with respect to the community, it maintains very, very high occupancy and good economic rents. We did want to point out that to date, our contributions that we have made toward the school district for our 21 school-age children that live in our 180 units. A lot of times people have a notion that multifamily is a severe impact on local school systems, and in the case of the park, that has not been the case at all. And I think part of that is because of our unit mix. We have a lot of two-bedroom units, but we don't have a lot of threes. And in looking at our Morse Road site, we are not considering threes at this time. It would be one and two-bedroom units. So we're really targeting young professionals, single households, non-related households that desire to dwell together because housing costs are rising exponentially here. We're always mindful of trying to create a product that meets current needs. We anticipate employing a whole host of green technologies as it relates to stormwater management at our site. In lieu of your typical retention ponds, we want to use rain gardens. A lot of our pavers, like in our turnarounds and so forth, are all permeable pavers, so we don't have as much water runoff. Our goal was not, the site currently has water runoff, but our goal was to mitigate that to the greatest extent practicable, even beyond what's required of us under Stage 2 discharge requirements per the Ohio EPA. So, and also we think those are just really strong touch points to a younger population that our luxury apartments would be really attractive to. As I mentioned, our Stonehenge, a lot of people are familiar with the name here in Gahanna, but one of our other handouts, if you were to move to one of the other slides. Well, I'm sorry, can we back up? I'm a terrible here. If you could just back up to that Morse Road. I want to highlight this too. We anticipate this is a $50 million investment. It will be a gated and fenced community. We're very serious about security. As I mentioned, we are employing green stormwater management practices. And we talked to the city economic development office and had them crunch some numbers, and the over 30 years, the non-school, that's the part of your tax duplicate that does not go to the school system, this would generate over $13 million. And for the schools, we would generate over $18.7 million over that 30-year period. And those were with some pretty conservative growth projections. So from a return on investment perspective, from a local community, those are very, very strong numbers. So we could move to the next slide, please. That we just colored in as I planned. Then this is the park. As you can see, it's great property. It's Class A. The units are very, very nice. And we have a lot of really good amenities there, and they're well utilized by our residents. And we'll go to the next slide. And this is how you know us by other names. We did a mixed-use project called Brahe Square in Dublin, Creekside. We are also own the golf club Little Turtle with some ancillary development, Turtle Park and a High Point. And also one of our urban projects is the Pierce. We have another one called Valencia, which has also been very successful. So, we try to do really unique developments that retain quality tenants for a long period of time, because again, we own it for a long period of time. And with that, I will defer to other speakers and any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Let's, next portion, we're going to call on our speakers. Your team will then have an opportunity to answer the questions or rebut the speakers. So after they're all done, after they all speak. Again, we're going to set our timer. We're going to ask speakers to limit to 3 minutes. When the 3 minutes is up, we'll ask you to finish your sentence and yield to the next speaker. As we move down the line, if something you were going to say has already been said, in respect to time, please, move on to your next topic, and we'll get them all in. Everybody will have an opportunity here. And again, I just ask for respect of the chambers, that only the speaker speak and the speaker speak into the microphone. When you do come up, please state your name and address. I'm just going to call them in the order that I have them here. And first we have a Mr. Gary Green. One other thing. Speakers, if you'll be addressing the commission here, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to rebut and speak later. So again, your comments are to us.
My name is Gary Green. I live at 1270 Windward Way West in Gahanna. My questions are, has studies been done on the existing infrastructure, whether the water distribution can handle the additional units and whether the sanitary sewer is properly sized for the impact? Also, I heard you say that there's a couple turn lanes that need to be installed. Is that going to be done proactive before the units are built, or is that going to be done after the impact of the additional residents are there, causing construction problems? Or I should say, traffic problems.
Thank you. And again, the team will respond to all these after everyone speaks. Next, we have Robin Storm. Strom. My apologies if I mess anyone's names up here.
Good evening. My name is Robin Strom. I'm an attorney that represents Windward Trace. It's a multi-unit family residential development. Condominiums, there are approximately 104 one-story buildings, and most of the residents in that community are senior citizens who have been there for several years since development, and are very concerned about how this three-story development is going to impact their homes. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about property values. Although there is no hard evidence that I have here tonight, I think we all can agree that when you place a three-story building 25 feet within, or probably 35 feet, if you're looking at the buffer, within a one-story residence, that's going to have impact as far as property values. It's going to have an impact as far as shading, overshadowing. The residents that abut that northern part of the northern part of the southern property line for the new development are probably never going to see the light of day with a three-story building there that close. Density, right now the application is for 251 units, which is down from 335, but still that's just at the maximum or just under the maximum number of units allowed for that size of a parcel. We're packing residential units into a smaller parcel of land. Again, the height, I can't stress the issues related to shadowing with no daylight. Even if you have trees that are 60, 70 feet tall, the light is still going to filter. In the winter, you're going to have the leaves gone. You're going to have light shading or light filtering down onto those units. If the city insists on approving this rezoning, one of the conditions for approval for a subsequent development plan, for the final development plan, should be at least to consider that those apartment buildings that are right at that southern border be diminished down to 2 stories versus just the 1 story or the 3-story buildings. One of the other concerns is with the zoning code, the minimum lot width required for this proposed development is right now at 2,585 feet. The lot width for this parcel development is only 984.11 feet. That's a decrease of approximately 60% of the required footage for a development this size. Again, the city would be packing in far more residents within the area than what would normally be required. And other variances in the area may have been granted, but most likely not to this extent, and not abutting residential neighborhoods, which will be impacted by the density. Again, the 25-foot setback, although I understand that that is part of the zoning, is a concern primarily because of the height and how that's going to impact abutting adjacent properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Leo Mccann.
Jesus, that's irritating.
You don't have to mess with that.
Oh, it's just beeping.
Good evening. I'm Leo Mccann. I'm the president of the Amberlea Village Condominium Association. I live at 1261 Amberlea Drive West. My main point tonight is the area surrounding the proposed project. Directly to the east, you have a 2-story assisted living facility, which is known as Story Point. Directly to the south, you have 1- and 2-story condominiums known as Windward Trace. To the southwest, you have 1- and 2-story condominiums known as Amberlea Village. Directly to the west, you have Sage, which is primarily 1-story. Those are communities. In the middle of this, we're going to have 13 3-story buildings with a clubhouse, pool, garages, 450-plus parking spaces, a 3-story complex in the middle of those condominium communities. That is going to have a detrimental impact on the residents that are already there. As the honorable gentleman mentioned earlier, the population living there is transient. a transient population is what moves into apartments, not residents, not part of the community. Therefore, I ask you to deny this application this evening, because I think we need to take time as what is best for Gahanna, the residents that are already living there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Edwin Douglas.
Good evening. Thank you for letting us express our concern this evening. Our president is Dennis Huffman. He can't be here tonight. He's had his rebound of COVID. I'm the treasurer of Windward Trace Condo Association, and I live in the unit that's in the far northwest corner of that property, right there. This is a kind of a tense situation, and in my advanced age, I kind of tend to forget things. So if you don't mind, I'm going to refer pretty heavily to my notes here. But what concerns me primarily about what I've heard here so far is these decisions appear to be made based on what we see on paper, what we see on maps, what rules we look at. When I started to write this, I was going to dwell on the zoning change, on the conditional use, and on the variances. But these decisions can't be made just by looking at pieces of paper and saying this fits this and this fits this. There are people that live there. They're not paper. And they're, as has been said, they're elderly people for the most part. What we'd like to do is have you at least delay this, if you won't reject it, until you can actually come and see the property that's going to be affected and the people who are going to be affected. I suspect that isn't normally done. I don't know how you could do it every time somebody asks for it, but nevertheless, I think in this case, an on-hands approach to see what's going to be done is very important. The only thing I really did focus in on is the variances. And one of them I thought just basically leaped off the page. In your staff report, it says your guiding principles for granting variances are outlined in your staff report. Planning Commission shall not grant a variance unless it finds that all of the following conditions apply. Subparagraph C of that same section says the granting of the application will not materially affect adversely the health or safety of persons residing or working in the neighborhood or the proposed use, and will not materially be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to property or improvements in such a neighborhood. Really? How could we possibly say that this isn't going to do any of those things? How could we possibly? Those units on Windward Trace are all one-story units on that side. The property value of those, we just had a sale in there of a unit, a three-bedroom unit, just in the past week or so for $340,000. Do you think those properties won't lose value if you put a three-story building 50 or 60 feet right out from it? We don't expect that you will never develop that property. That's not reasonable. But we do think that you should take a little time to decide if this is the proper development for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Booker.
Good evening. My name is Robert Booker, and I reside at 1278 Windward Way West in the Windward Trace condo community. And I join my fellow community residents in opposition to the rezoning proposal at 5503 Morse Road. I'm a retired highway patrol officer. I live there, so I think about safety and security all the time. And sometimes you don't think about safety and security until it's threatened or until you don't have it anymore. We live in a tranquil community that's essentially hidden from the public. Crime maps of the neighborhood show a very low volume of activity. We live kind of like in an oasis. We feel that will change. Rezoning that property, eliminating the richly dense wooded area, will leave our properties open to incursion from Morse Road. Most certainly during the construction process, when all those trees are eliminated, and when that 3-story, 251-unit apartment complex is completed, there will be no longer any natural barriers such as a heavily wooded preserve to shield our communities from trespassers. The curious, those seeking a shortcut to Johnstown Road, or individuals with their eyes on something. We are not judging the potential tenants because we don't know them. However, there are privacy issues. We live here. We were here first. How comfortable would you be knowing that your living space could be viewed from the 3rd floor of an apartment complex next door? This proposed rezoning should be denied because there are way too many questions. It should be at least delayed. We need answers from the developers on how they're going to be good neighbors and to show us how they plan to separate us from this apartment complex. Their plan will take something away from us, a measure of security. What are they going to do to answer that? Because once you lose the sense of the security, it's very difficult to get it back again. Thank you for this opportunity.
Michael I'm sorry.
Good evening. I'm Michael Arnott. I'm at 790 Windward Way, and I'm here tonight to talk about the Morse Road proposal. Planning is really important, and balance in planning is critical when you're talking about a project like this with this potential impact. The level of sensitivity in the area, particularly being in the Morse Road corridor and being surrounded by these communities. The staff report has gaps, and let me explain what I mean by that. First, the comparison to the other properties surrounding what's proposed is a false equivalency. Yes, there are multifamily dwellings, but for example, the multifamily dwellings to the south in Windward Trace are buildings that have 4 units. Many have 1 story. Most of those units are occupied by 1 or 2 people without children. And all the parking in Windward Trace is garage parking. So you compare that to the development that's being proposed with around 450 or how many parking spaces, most of which are outdoors. It's a attractor to people coming in and potentially looking through those cars. The neighborhood to the north, we recently installed a Ring camera, and you can get on the Ring network, and there are like a hotspot of reports in the neighborhood just to the north of Morse Road in Columbus, and the number one thing is people coming in and walking through because they're looking through cars. What's the difference between the older adult care facilities on either side? Well, it's not people parked there overnight outside. People to the south are not parked outside overnight. That's only to the property to the north. So, yes, there's parked 180 units. This is 251 units crammed into this property. I'd ask you as a commission to at least consider all of the variables here. There's a lot happening. This is a large number of variances being requested. Once you make the decision to go forward, there's not a lot we can do to go back. You know, so for example, if you approve the in lieu of, and by the way, from a public policy perspective, I'd urge the City Council and the Commission to look at that because at the very minimum, it gives the appearance of a conflict of interest. So I'd ask you to at least consider that there's a lot happening here, and please at least delay, if you're not prepared to deny the request. Thank you.
Thank you. Joyce Reich?
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this issue. My name is Joyce Reich, and I reside at 769 Windward Lane in Gahanna, and my condo is actually it's on the lot line, the back lot line of ours, so it's the center condo, I believe, that will, actually, my bedroom, my front door, and my sunroom will be open to those units that are proposed. The concerns I have, of course, is the setback being close, also the 3 stories, which would allow people in the upper stories of those units to be able to visually look into parts of my condo and the others that are on that lot line. So it's going to probably mean that I'll have to have blinds closed the better part of every day, and then I'm going to have less light. And with condos, you're a shortage of light in condos anyway. Another concern I have, besides the 3 stories, is that the parking variance that doesn't allow for the 25 feet from the buildings, seems like nobody even knows why that is. I believe it was mentioned that they didn't know in the initial report, and I'm not sure you guys know why either, but I'm kind of wondering, why was it ever created if nobody knows? There has to be some sort of a reasoning of whether it's density or the noxious fumes from the cars or something of that, whatever it might be, okay? Every time there's a zoning request and there are variances, it's that developer asking us to eat away at what we already decided we thought was best for our community, the current zoning regulations that you all, or people in our community, have created. So if we're doing this, we're really chipping away at our community and what we're wanting for it, the density, the sizes, and all of those things. So I would ask you to, if not deny, at least delay, because there are many conditional uses and variances that are different than what your zoning and our zoning is initially been listed. So I thank you.
Thank you. Amy Valley. Amy in the, oh, here she comes.
I will read most of this.
Okay, if you speak
My
into the
name is
microphone.
Amy Valley. My home is 1296 Amberley Drive East. The people who surround the wooded area are elderly, the Sage, the Story Point facilities, and the 2 villages. I'm going to speak for both villages. Many in these villages are retired. Many live alone. Many have health and aging issues. Many are caretakers. We are a very vulnerable population. We are worried about our safety should this proposed development be built. We are easy targets for theft and other crimes. As an example, the children from an apartment to our west were seen rummaging through our mailboxes. Our mailboxes are full of checks and prescription drugs. There are also direct sight lines from that western apartment, giving us insight to what's to come. We are also concerned about the day after day, month after month, dirt, dust, and noise that will come from the construction itself. Will the dust affect a neighbor with breathing problems? Will the noise set off behavior problems in our friends with dementia? Or will our neighbors with heart problems feel increased stress? How will this affect our pets? I live on the corner of the woods. I see it from most of my windows and my patio. I see birds from hawks to hummingbirds. My cat and I enjoy seeing the wildlife quietly pass by our windows. I searched for 2 years for a condo with this view. But that woods is not just standing there looking pretty. It's working to clean our air and water. The birds are killing tons of insects and also mice. That woods to me is an employee of Gahanna. I feel that the woods, the old growth trees, the wildlife, and us are just so much collateral damage brought on by this explosions of buildings craze. Please take our thoughts and our ideas seriously. Keep planning good living spaces using already established environment. And keep in mind this very vulnerable population. Thanks.
Thank you. Kenneth Householder?
Good evening. Thanks for letting us talk tonight. There was a lot of things on what I was going to say that people have already covered. So I'm going to kind of just highlight a couple of them. And the main concern about the 3-story apartments is actually the density, that 500 to 1,000 people that could possibly live there. And if they all, if they have 4 people living in 250, you got 1,000 people. And of that, you're probably going to have another, 500 cars that are going to in and out, which doesn't affect me directly because that's out on Morse Road. I live up in the corner, clear back in the northeast corner of Amberley Village, and I back up right into the corner of the new development. Yep, right there. And there's about 10 foot from my back of my condo to where the development's going to start. The 25 foot would start. So right now that pretty much kills my view of anything of why I bought the condo. The other main thing that I want to talk about is the construction, when and if they go forward with this, is that I think it was brought up, the dust, the dirt, the construction. My recommendation is that if it does go ahead, they should construct an 8-foot brick wall around the 3 sides of the development, except for Morse Road. Now, I know the contractor or the people that are the developers trying to do this, it's not going to like that at all. But it does a few things. It controls what's happening where he wants to build. And it also helps us to keep people out of our areas and our neighbors at Windward Trace from cutting through our properties to get to 62 and the YMCA and other businesses along that route over there. So I guess in summing it all up, we don't feel that this apartment development would be anywhere near a good thing for our area the way it is right now. Yeah, it was kind of like putting a time bomb right in the middle of a housing community and setting it off. We would more like to see the land developed into single home condos which would go with pretty much everything around us, and would appreciate it if we did not build another city within our own city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Karen Fetters?
Good evening. My name is Karen Fetters. I live at 1320 Amberley Drive, Gahanna, and I've lived in my condo for 14 years, and I am a little passionate about this whole thing. So I own a condo that borders the southwest side of the proposed complex, where 2 of the many 3-story apartment buildings are going to be built. I'm not opposed to change. I'm not opposed to progress. But I am opposed to this type of change and progress. For almost 14 years, I've observed from my living room three-season room, patio, and driveway, a view of majestic trees whose leaves of green create a panoramic scene in the fall. Certainly a sight to behold. The developer is asking to replace that beautiful scene with multiple three-story buildings that can possibly look directly into mine and others' three-season rooms, patios, and even the living rooms. With a setback of a mere 25 feet, add in the number of units, number of people, and number of cars, the noise level will rise exponentially. Thus, the privacy and serenity of our communities will be totally compromised. The developer will design, construct, and leave. We, as owners and neighbors, will have to live with it day in and day out. So as I said, I'm not opposed to change, but I feel this complex really serves the interest of just one person, and that's the developer. This complex does not fit in with the surroundings, so I'm requesting that the Planning Commission reject this plan in favor of something that will fit in better with the established communities and maybe be of benefit to more than one entity. Thank you.
Seal knots?
Hello, my name is Seal Knotts, and I live at 785 Windward Lane. I'm in the back area by the beautiful tree lines. From the city's planning documents from the 5503 Morse Road project, we learned that there are protected wetlands on the property. Wetlands have been called natural kidneys because of their ability to filter improper from water settlements out of runoff and dissolved condiments blind to plants, surface or transform, resulting to improved water quality. Wetlands perform other valuable functions, inclusion reducing flood flow, shorelines, erosions control. Wetlands provide a haven for rare and endangered plants, and 1/3 of the endangered species depend on wetlands for survival. Many wetlands are important: fishing, spawning, nursery areas, as well as nesting, resting, and feeding areas for wildfowl. Wetlands are provided recreational opportunities, such as canoeing, fishing, bird watching, opportunities for the 5503 Morris Road proposed project. Our understanding is that the state and federal permits have not been secured yet. I request that the Planning Commission delay further action until the following agencies complete their portions of the permit review process before these wetlands are disturbed. Ohio EPA, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Catherine Thomas? Not a problem.
I am Kay Thomas, and I live at 1305 Windward Lane. If you take that little mouse all the way down to the purple, all the way down to the purple, on the top, up at the very top, and that corner, right there, that's me. That's me. And our building is right on the line that that apartment complex is going to go on. So contrary to the city staff's report, my home, my 3 neighbors, will be directly negatively impacted by the construction of this apartment complex. I moved into Windward Trace just about, well, in December. And I went there because of the open space and because of the trees. and now those trees are going to be gone. So that's an issue for me. But more specifically tonight, I would like to address the city's required parkland dedication. Requiring land to be dedicated to the city for public use as parks, recreational facilities, trails, or wetlands is an absolutely wonderful thing. With Gahanna having an above-average amount to be proud of, it becomes a very pleasing community to those looking for housing. It gives us, the residents, respite from the urban sprawl that so many cities have. That the Planning Commission had the foresight to place code in the guidelines for these uses is most commendable. But a builder can get around those requirements if he or she pays fees in lieu. I love that term. Pay their way out of meeting code requirements. That is exactly what you are being asked to approve. Allow the builder to pay Parks and Recreation $175,001 rather than meet the city code. The city staff reported that the appropriate people did an evaluation of the property and recommended the fees in lieu. And it was briefly touched on. One of the things that I would like if we delayed this whole process is to have more access to that information to see whether we feel that due justice was given to the land. As you often say, most likely as members, code exists for a reason, and following code is good protection for the fees, for the city. Fees in lieu do not support the city code. Now, interestingly enough, this property is not quite 14 acres, so the code, I think, would require 3 acres or less for dedication. It has 2 wetland areas. Why can't the wetland area be the parkland dedication? It would retain the natural flow of water, and it would protect the wildlife. So in closing, I need to ask you to delay or reject the fees in lieu and the mitigation of the wetlands. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara Meacham? You can raise up.
Hello, my name's Barbara Meacham. I live at 778 Windward Lane. I'm in opposition to this rezoning and proposal. And here's why. It's our understanding that the proposed project has not completed a full traffic assessment. Because this is an extremely sensitive issue for the Morse Road corridor planning area, impacting Gahanna residents and Morse Road communities, both to the east and west and surrounding areas. We're asking for more time to fully study the impact of around 500 additional cars entering Morse Road from that property. During the last several years, commuters in the morning often find themselves coming to a complete halt in the westbound traffic in front of the property. I suppose that 500 cars could technically make a left-hand turn into gridlock traffic every morning if enough people let them in, but how realistic is that to take place safely and within a reasonable time frame? We need more time to work out the details of this issue. I also noticed that according to your Gahanna land use plan, it says it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to walk to the transit, Coda Transit, and there's no planned proposed pathways or any planned transit at this time down in front of this new complex you're going to build. I urge you to deny the 3 action items for this application, or at least, the very least, delay action until these issues can be properly addressed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mark Naraki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I understand that we don't own the property, so there is going to be some use, that we're always going to be talking about. And I believe a large part of that is the aesthetic of what exists right now in this beautiful piece of land. I mean, you are the guardians and the gatekeepers for what this community develops, and those that live here, and I'm sorry, I live at 1292 Amberley Drive East, that have, how you've developed this already, I think establishes what the best use of this property would be. And if you're late to the party, that's the last piece of land to be developed, I believe your obligation, both ethical and moral, is to find something that fits into that and not come in and just basically mow the whole thing down and cram as many units as you possibly can. I think with the park and recreations, the wetlands, there are issues that I know that aren't just going to be here tonight, but what I'm asking is thoughtful consideration be to find some use to retain as much of that natural habitat we have, that we have 2.5 times the trees of a national average is something to be proud of, both your predecessors and what you've done and what the next committee will do. We need to do everything possible to retain that. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. And Robin Blake.
Hello, my name is Robin Blake. I live at 1308 Windward Lane East. This is written by my husband, Larry Blake, who could not be here tonight. We care. We, the Windward Trace community, are here today to offer our concerns as it relates to the proposed rezoning of property identified as 5503 Morse Road. The proposed rezoning was provided through a letter dated August the 5th, 2022, from the City of Gahanna Planning Commission advising the continuous property owner of the meeting we now attend. The 2019 Gahanna Land Use Plan provides a letter from the Mayor of Gahanna who cites a resolution which provides, in part, city planning shall seek to optimize the use of land, available land, so that it reflects the needs and desires of the community. Community, by definition, is a group of people living in the same place or having particular characteristics in common. We are the community, a group of taxpayers, continuous property owners directly affected by the proposed rezoning. The submitted staff report fails to address and or consider the needs and desires of our community. The author cites a review of the impact on the environment. However, it does not address the impact on the community. This process has been in motion for as early as February of 2022, yet our community was not contacted and allowed to provide feedback. In addressing the Director of Planning, Scott Harper provides in part, we are committed to save as many on-site existing trees as possible. We will focus our efforts to minimize the impact. The proof of this is not evident in the June 9th resubmitted site plan. If this is an after-the-fact process, then the zoning approval process is flawed. The concept plan does not show the lot lines as it directly relates to the Windward Trace subdivision, nor which trees will be affected in the planning section number 3. Harper provides that there will be a 25-foot setback from the newly acquired right-of-way. However, there is no clear indication of the distance the 5 three-story buildings will be from the property line abutting Windward Trace. Under item number 6, Harper addresses required buffer zones. The perimeter of the proposed zoning permit area should be clearly marked and visible. Defining the limits of the proposed permit boundaries. However, the site plan does not clearly indicate proposed buffer zones and or what the proposed buffer zone will look like. Buffer zone should indicate the intended use of the land located between abutting properties and what, if any, will be in place to obstruct the view of the proposed buildings. The concept plan shows 5 three-story buildings which abut Windward Trace but no buffer zone. The staff report notes the companion application for conditional use which, if allowed, should grant buildings which exceed 2 stories, which is not consistent with contiguous properties. At a minimum, a detailed plan showing the relationship between the contiguous properties to include a 3D rendering of the proposed housing should be mandatory before determining whether to grant the rezoning. It should be noted, item number 2 of the rezoning application submission requirements evidence the completion of a survey of the property. However, this survey does not clearly detail the relationship between the 2 properties. Where are the actual lot lines? How close will the 5 3-story buildings be to the existing homes within the Windward Trace community? The Windward Trace community is deeply concerned as to the type of environment the proposed development will create. What will our community look like with 5 3-story buildings towering over us? Why was no consideration provided to the continuous property owners to assess our needs and desires prior to this meeting to grant the proposed rezoning and ultimate development? The questions posed, along with many others, should cause immediate pause to the rezoning process and allow for an interactive process between the developers and affected communities. Once again, in line with the EDEC, which provides city planning shall seek to optimize the use of available land so that it reflects the needs and desires of the community. We respectfully request the City of Kahana Zoning Committee to allow us the opportunity to engage the property owner and developers to present how the proposed development will directly affect our beloved community. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was my final speaker slip. Were there any other speakers? We will now close the speaker portion, and will the applicant like to respond to the comments made?
Okay, well, there were a lot of comments, and I'm thankful that we have all of those, and I'm not here to tell people how to feel, and I know people have some very strong feelings as it relates to any type of change that will occur near their homes. I will try to speak to a few of these things that I can off the top of my head. I also have Andy Gardner here. He's much smarter than me, and he could speak to the wetland issues. But I will, the things, anything I don't respond to, I did take notes, and we will take that back and talk among our staff, and then also coordinate it with whatever city or government agency to see there's, why that outcome occurred. Let me see. I do remember one that related to traffic improvements on Morse Road. First off, to note, Gahanna and the City of Columbus are both parties to the Multimodal Thoroughfare plan, which required a widening of the right-of-way on Morse Road. That multimodal plan is in place because both the City of Columbus and the City of Gahanna believe that this is going to be an impacted corridor and they have to plan for growth. Again, based upon all the land use patterns that have been laid out in plans and exist there today. So any improvements we have to make as far as taper lanes, turn lanes, and so forth would be done during construction. We would not open without those in place. So it will not be an after the fact situation. I don't believe the city engineers department would even let us do that anyways. We wouldn't want to do it because it would be a terrible marketing window for us. And also as it relates to we have procured a traffic impact study, and it has been reviewed on 2 occasions by both the City of Gahanna and the City of Columbus. We have taken the recommendations and are making adjustments to our access on the plan. And then that's in the process right now, and that will be resubmitted for ultimate concurrence. One other thing I just want to point out is that with respect to renters, I know most think they're a transient population, but we found that a lot of our residents are community stakeholders and non-transient. Some people just prefer not to own a house. And they like to call us when their toilet doesn't work or that, and they don't like they really just want to live in a quality environment and do the other things they think are important in their lives. And yet, they're still the members of the churches. They volunteer for all types of local activities. And again, as I said, they're community stakeholders. So I don't necessarily know that it's always fair to paint renters as transient. Variances, I would love to not ask for this many variances. And actually, I would tell you, given looking at the map, and actually, I live in this neighborhood. I live on Riva Ridge. Lived here since 1993, put 4 kids through the school system. But I would say that as far as our frontage requirement, none of our neighbors would meet it. And that's what happens when you have a deep voice, the lights go out. But no, I would say that that frontage requirement, I don't understand it, but none of our neighbors, I don't believe, would meet it as well. So we have to get that variance. And as it relates to the distance for the parking, I won't even say that I know the reasons. I'm sure someone had a good one, but it's very unique for us here. Excuse me, I'm just reviewing my notes. There's a lot of stuff. One thing also, there's been a lot of discussion about the park-like setting in the park, and I can't speak to any decisions made by the Parks Board and the city. However, what I will say is that our connectivity, there was no planned connectivity for any parks in this part of this North Triangle, including all of our neighbors to the south and west. There were no greenways, green belts, or anything to connect. So it would be pretty much a flower in the desert. And I think the ultimate plan had always contemplated that Morse Road would have a more intense use given the fact that it is on a multimodal thoroughfare. Okay. Again, like I said, anything I don't address here right now doesn't mean it's not important. It's just, it's something that will require some more discussion or coordination. But right now I'm going to defer to Andy Gardner. He's our engineer. Scott's here too as well. And they can speak to you about wetlands.
Andrew Gardner, V3 Companies. My address is 6628 Burbank Place, Westerville, Ohio. I'm the civil engineer for the project. I'm going to address a couple different things that I wrote down here that people had concerns about. I'll start with the wetlands because I heard that the most. We have conducted a wetland delineation on this property. There are approximately 2.8 acres of isolated wetlands on the property. We've already gone through the Army Corps of Engineers determination to determine that they are not what you would call jurisdictional in a sense that they're not connected to a waters of the United States. So the Army Corps now turns that approval process over to the Ohio EPA. We will be going through an approval process with the Ohio EPA to mitigate these wetlands. That process requires a significant amount of design and detail to submit to the Ohio EPA. Grading plans, stormwater management plans, landscape plans, all of that stuff needs to be done to obtain the permits from the Ohio EPA to mitigate these wetlands. And then when that's all done, we will be paying into a wetland mitigation bank a significant amount of dollars to mitigate these wetlands, for wetlands to be created elsewhere within the same watershed. So my point is, we're asking for a rezoning this evening to the same rezoning that the neighbors to the south and west have. That rezoning allows us the opportunity to then proceed to the next phase of this process, the final development plan process, which allows my client the comfort level to spend the dollars on design, which is a significant investment, so that we can work through these issues, get the permits for the wetlands, show them greater detail on landscape plans, screening, buffering, those types of things. But we are working through that process, and hopefully, you know, the approval of the rezoning will allow us to continue to work through that process. And we'll be able to present more detail and more information at the final development plan stage regarding the wetlands. I heard a question about sanitary sewer. There is a sanitary sewer stub. It is actually at the southeast corner of our site, and it was sized for this site, for this development, and does have capacity to handle the amount of units we're proposing. Water, presently on Morse Road, is actually a unique situation. There's a dead-end water line at the east end of our site and a dead-end water line at the west end of our site. The city engineers has requested that as part of this development, we connect it. So we're going to be constructing about 1,000 feet of new 8-inch water line across the frontage of this property, installing new fire hydrants, to serve this property as well as complete that loop, which will help redundancy on the water system in the area. There is also a 36-inch City of Columbus transmission water line in Morse Road, but that's too big. We can't tap that. The city won't allow that sort of thing. So, but water is being handled. We're a significant amount of investment to connect that water line that we'll be designing as well. Traffic, as Doug mentioned, we have completed a traffic impact study. It has been reviewed, and we are adjusting our access points and turn lanes accordingly. We'll follow the recommendations of the city engineers on traffic. There is currently a sidewalk across the frontage. We will be reconstructing a significant portion of that as part of our development. So as far as pedestrian connectivity, we'll maintain that as well. The only thing I'll add is I heard some concerns about safety. We mentioned in the first part of the presentation, we are proposing a gated community. It will be fenced. Security is very important to us. So as far as, the concern of maybe people coming from our site onto the adjacent sites and stuff, we have ways to mitigate that that we can discuss further in the next stages of the process. Thank you.
Scott Harper, 424 Beecher Road here in Gahanna. I just wanted to point out to some of the members of the public that got up and spoke that the plan that they're seeing here is only conceptual, and it is not a final development plan. So the concerns about the buffer zone along the southern property and the west, that will come with the final development plan, and the city does have landscaping standards for those buffer zones. So that will have to be met at the final development stage. Thank you.
Yeah, that was how I was going to wrap up too, is that just, the reminder to all who spoke, and that is, this is just the zoning and conditional use variances. We still have to present a much more detailed plan that talks about massing, scale, materials of buildings, landscape buffers, a whole host of things. So this isn't a one and done thing, and we will make note of all the comments that we did here today. Okay, Andy.
One more thing I forgot to mention regarding the, this kind of speaks to the wetlands as well as the stormwater. My client is very passionate about green infrastructure. They have asked us to investigate, constructed wetlands on the site for our stormwater management, rain gardens, bioretention, pervious pavers. We'll be doing we'll be investigating as part of the next stage of this a significant amount of that type of infrastructure to figure out how to best handle this on site. And that all goes to our wetland permitting process as well.
Any questions?
Thank you. So I think what we're going to do now, let's take a 10-minute break. We've been here 2 hours and 15 minutes. We'll come back at 9:25. We will then close the public portion of the meeting and open it up to the committee for questions to you. Okay, so 10 minutes.
when they were married, and I was at the hospital getting the cast on.
We'll get started again.
Yeah. Yeah, they're picketing. First guy to touch.
Okay, thank you. The last piece of the public portion of the meeting that we're going to do is correspondence. I read 3 of those. All were in opposition to this project. All were from residents, except for one who was from a trustee for a trust that owns a residence. I'm going to read the names of the letters I got so that clerk, we can match those, because some were sent to Planning Commission, which includes city staff, so that they can go on the record. Some were sent to the 7 of us individually, which means city staff would not be made aware of them. Some were sent to me personally, individually. I'm not sure if those were sent to other members or not. So I'm going to just read the list of letters and emails, all the emails that we received, and then we will enter them into the record. I got one, my apologies if I mess any names. Edwin Douglas, Leo and Crystal Mccann, Margaret and Barbara Meacham, Mrs. Knotts, Robert and Cheryl Booker, Kenneth and Vicky Householder, Tammy Gardner and Mary Mackey, Randall Goldsberry, Nora Bolin, Barbara Anderson, Dr. and Mrs. Joseph Whitlock, Lois Kamnitzer, Debbie Rose, Antika Janikowska, Patty Nelson, Robert Egler, Bradley Kaplan, who is the trustee, Michael or not, there were multiple emails, Mary Beth Hoffman, Deborah and Terry Matthias, Carolyn Burdham, Kathy Levy, and Catherine Thomas. So thank you for your correspondence. We did read, I certainly read everyone who was sent to me, and I'm sure my fellow commission members. I'm sure my fellow commission members also read them. So Stonehenge, Doug, if we can get you back up to the podium here, we will now close the public portion of the meeting, which means no more comments. And again, nothing said can be heard unless it's spoken into the microphone. The public portion is now closed, and we will open it up for the committee to ask questions of the applicant. Who wants to start? Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Urban, understanding that this is not a final development plan before us or design review, the conceptual drawing that was presented, is it reasonable to presume that that is going to look like what will come back before us? So is it, generally speaking, does that represent the product that's going to come back if these applications are approved?
That would be, at this juncture, yes.
Okay.
I mean, that's a reasonable expectation.
Thank you.
Mr. Shabaka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to refine that. So the 18 units per acre is a mark you guys are trying to hit.
Yes, sir.
And 15 units per acre is a dead project? 12 units per acre is a dead project?
At this time, we have, we actually looked at this at a higher density and then lowered that to where we are currently at 18. So right now, all of our modeling is based on that 18, is the answer I could give you at this time.
Thank you.
Mr. Wester.
Yes, I have a question, maybe a little forward thinking, but what are your dust and drag out control procedures when you're in construction?
In construction, we use a lot of water trucks. We also run street sweepers, because the trucks do pull on and off of public roads onto the site. And we also employ, the dust control measures are on site as well. And then also, I know there's been a concern, that some of these trees have to come down, a lot of these trees have to come down to put buildings in. But that would be a very systematic, procedure to clear that site to mitigate any erosion problems that we would have leaving that much barren soil.
And since you brought the trees up, I hate to see all those trees go. I would hope that your plan would take that into consideration.
Sir, yeah, absolutely. Our landscape architecture firm is going to coordinate with our arborist, who's actually performed a tree study. We're going back and just dialing down species. And then we've made a commitment to work with the city arborist. And I'd love to preserve as many trees as I can, especially, you know, to the greatest extent practicable. It would serve as a great border, you know, but we're just not there yet. It's not that we don't want to do it, we're just not there yet. Andy has one more, can I have my engineer speak to the dust?
Well, with respect to the dust control, in addition, what we do is, at least what I've done on previous projects for this client, is we'll conduct our own weekly inspections of the site, sediment erosion controls, just to make sure that everything's maintained properly, cleaned properly, and there's no issues. If we don't, we wind up getting in trouble with the EPA and the city and everything else. So we're very good about maintaining that stuff and trying to manage those controls on site as much as possible.
Thank you.
Mr. Shabaka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy, have you walked the site?
I have.
You have. So is there any evidence, is there any trails that are established there? Is there any picnic areas that are established there?
There are no picnic areas. There's some trails that have been cut through. My surveyors cut some as well, just to get in there. In general, it's very dense woods on the western half. It thins out a little bit on the eastern half. But no trails or picnic areas that I'm aware of. We did find one open cistern on the site that actually is a little bit of a danger concern. My surveyors flagged it and marked it, and, you know, just to make sure nobody falls in it. It's obviously been there for a very, very, very long time, but no picnic areas or anything like that.
Briars, a lot of briars or something?
Yes, a lot of underbrush, a lot of briars.
So it's really to be looked at, really not to be used currently?
That is correct.
Kind of a deal. Doug, if I can call you Doug?
Absolutely.
So sell 100 feet to the people behind you on the south edge. You got a price?
A price for?
Yeah, selling 100 feet of it.
I
'Cause
don't have a price off the top of my head, no.
So there's a 25-foot buffer that you have for the landscaping. That's going to be all new. If we can save some trees, most likely.
No, if we could, I mean, ultimately, if we can save vegetation and trees that are there, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, we really, I'm not being flippant when I say this, we really have a commitment. We, you know, given the fact that we are putting a lot of development on this site, we really have a commitment to try to preserve as much of that as we can.
So getting the rezoning would give you the opportunity to make those more decisions in the final plan.
Oh, absolutely. We could move forward, and then we could give you greater detail and specificity. And we could explore a lot of things by pulling, you know, maybe increasing the size of buffers or what those buffers are. I could probably do some light studies too, because one of the comments that was made relating to shadowing, I can't respond to because I really don't know. I'm trying to understand how I affect that severely, but I'm not saying that I don't. I just don't understand that right now.
So what was your response to an 8-foot-high fence on 3 sides?
I'll do it tomorrow. Well, I can't do it tomorrow. I don't own land. I'll do it. I'll do it as soon as we start. But we had planned on putting a fence around the property anyways. We do that. Again, we don't want to be bad neighbors to our neighbors, and we don't want bad stuff happening in our communities, again, because we build and keep. We don't build and flip. So it's a different mindset. And so we're looking at the long term. We make decisions based on 10, 15, and 20 years out, not 3 years till I get an institutional investor to buy my property.
So in your conceptual plan that you presented before us, let's just say we do a 2-story buildings all along the south end. Could you do a 4-story building closer to Morse Road to help get the density up? I mean, is that an option?
Let somebody smarter than me talk to that.
The reason why these buildings are 3-story is it is very, very code-driven. Once you go to 4 stories, you're required to put in an elevator, and the codes don't allow 4 stories with a single means of egress. So there's a reason why most of these developments kind of look very similar, that they're actually developed in similar ways, and the footprints are very similar. Because once you go to 4 stories, the expense goes much higher, and it's much more difficult to develop code-wise.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Chair? Good.
Mr. Bago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you elaborate a little bit more when you, because really my big question was, what's driving the 3 stories here? So could you elaborate when it says it's code-driven? Could you elaborate a little bit more and also maybe speak to the economics of that and with this overall project?
Sure, absolutely. The section of the Ohio Building Code that determines this is a section that actually limits the heights of buildings without elevators, and it's strictly residential R2 structures. So that's why a lot of these buildings you'll see is 24-unit buildings, where there's a firewall that separates the buildings straight down the center, 12 on one side, 12 on the other. And very much code-driven. If you go 4 stories, you are then required to put in an elevator, which, that in and of itself is about $125,000 per elevator. And then you're also required to put in additional stairways. So it does drive the costs up, and it's a very, very different product type and topology.
So again, just so I get it straight in my mind, when you're referencing code, this is Ohio Building Code that you're adhering to, correct?
It is, yes.
Okay. My next question is, do you have any, again, ballpark figure for rents that you'd be charging with this project?
I defer to Adam on that. You do? Okay, thank
you. These units are 1 and 2 bedroom units. They would start at about $1,500. And then probably the premium 2s would be just north of $2,000. It's all subject to change depending on when this opens. And the way we're seeing hyperinflation and everything we're doing, that could change. But right now, we have a commitment. We don't build affordable housing per se, but we try to build really good value-oriented workforce housing, especially for young professionals that are attracted to these neighborhoods because they have a high quality of life. So that's our price point. That's consistent with what we charge. It's a little bit more than what we charge at the park currently.
Okay, so my next question goes back to when you say it's a quote-unquote gated community. Could you just speak a little bit more? And again, I know that we haven't really delved a lot into the design of this, but what type of gating are we talking about?
Well, if I could get the color rendering of that site plan we sent the supplemental package, it'll illustrate it a little better. Here we go. Yeah, even though it really doesn't. If you take a look up by the clubhouse where you see that roundup, with the turnaround up there are 2 gates on each side of that. We don't want to create a stacking problem onto Morse Road by people that get there and figure out you can't get in because you don't live there or somebody won't answer the intercom to let you in. So we intentionally allowed for that turnaround to be open before you get to those security gates. And that also allows people to come into our clubhouse to rent units, or let's say you're there for a baby shower that you rented and you have some guests, we can get you in and you're not stuck on Morse Road. So those gates would be vertical gates, and they are probably, given the age, when this gets built, those are all phone accessed. And so those will open and close to allow people in and out. Right, and also on the Andy wants me to point out, again, given this is zoning, we tried to put a couple things in so people would see at least our minds were working, we're thinking of these things. But this doesn't show the fence as well, but we would put a fence around the perimeter of this property.
And then one final question on the pond that you're showing there on the southeast corner.
Yes.
And again, I know this is kind of conceptual, but do you think that that's adequate for the amount of stormwater runoff that you're anticipating?
Yes, I do, and I'm going to let Andy tell you why.
The answer is that pond in itself is not adequate for the stormwater management. Again, it's our intention. We're kind of showing it in those green areas as well. They'll be more like large landscaped rain garden, green infrastructure, if you will. We use engineered soil, water tolerant plants, under drains to provide the stormwater management in other areas like that to really reduce the runoff that ultimately winds up in that pond. The pond, at the end of the day, we may not even need it once I get into the full detailed design. The only reason it's there is the technical actual storm sewer outlet for this site is at that southeast corner. There's a 24-inch storm sewer stub to our property. But will we need that pond, or will it be that size? Possibly, but when we get into design, we'll know. But size in of itself, no, it's not big enough.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I had.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Greenberg.
Good evening.
Good
Couple
evening.
questions. In the application, there was something stated about rooftop storage of water and parking lot ponding. Can you define what both of those are for us?
Parking lot ponding traditionally is probably something we are no longer going to consider since I've had conversations with our client about using some more green infrastructure type measures. But to define that, what you typically do is you have a catch basin in your parking lot, you restrict the outlet of that catch basin, and you let the water pull up in the parking lot as your storage. It's an antiquated way to do stormwater management, and it is no longer what we are intending to do on this site. As far as rooftop storage, similarly, in fact, I just did this on a project down in Whitehall, similar type development in Whitehall. You know, we can design a certain amount of water to be stored on the roofs of buildings. Naturally gets stored there anyway in heavy rains because it's restricted by gutters and everything else draining it off. So we can build that into our detention design as well as a means of restricting water. I think that site down in Whitehall, I mean, we basically planned for about 8 inches of water stored on those rooftops. And it's working fine. It's been there. That's, what's that? I'm trying to think of the development called. It's where the Bag of Nails is and everything else right on Broad and, yeah. And it's been working fine.
My next question has to do with traffic a little bit. Traffic coming out. As I drove by there this morning, and I was heading west. At 7:45, it was almost bumper to bumper, going towards 270, going right by the property. So I think that most of the people that live there's going to be a couple hundred cars coming out of there, probably a day or more, will end up having to go right and then go around the roundabout to come back around to go west. It'll be really difficult to make that left turn, I think, because there's going to be a lot of cross traffic coming both ways.
With respect to the traffic impact study, the city of Columbus and the city of Gahanna are exploring 2 locations for a signal. One is at the east side of our site. One is actually east of us. They have not made a determination. They can't do both. They'll do one or the other. So that will help alleviate a lot of that. And a lot of the modeling that Carpenter Marty did, who is our transportation specialist, you know, we looked at all that and we took a look at flows and actually did literal counts. So there's going to be a signal there. I just can't tell you what intersection it's going to be, but it will be near our site.
Okay. As you heard tonight, everybody's concerned about the trees from the audience, and I certainly am as well. Been driving by that site for 27 or 28 years. It's a beautiful site with the trees, and they're probably some of the tallest trees in the area. And I'm pleased to see that you're going to have an arborist that'll help and try and do your best to retain as many trees as possible on this site. I guess my final question is, we heard a lot from the residents tonight of their concern on the southern boundary of the property. When you come back to us with the final development plan, will you take into consideration some of the thoughts, recommendations, lowering the 3-story buildings in the back to 2 stories, putting the 8-foot fence? And what kind of fence is that, I would ask as well, that you're looking at, that you would put in the back on that fence to block people from coming through, and maybe even the headlights from parking, going into their property?
It's a solid privacy fence.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so,
That's right.
and so when you're coming back to us with that final development plan, will you be looking at some of the things that you heard here tonight as far as the impact to their property from this new project?
We will do everything in our possible to create the best barriers we can for our neighbors. You know, and I'm not trying to be evasive. It's just, I want to do the best thing. I don't, given all the comments we have right now, we're going to digest that, and when we come back with a final development plan, we can present that and see if that's acceptable to all the parties.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Suriata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to kind of back up to go forward a little bit here, and I have a couple questions for the city. Michael, can you articulate, this is just for clarity for my benefit, what defines estate residential, which is what the property is currently zoned as, right?
I guess I'd have to ask a clarifying question. When you mean define estate residential, we're talking about like far as uses?
Yeah, what goes on a property that's zoned estate residential?
It's not property zoning that we typically see in planning commission because it's usually not being developed, but it is a single family zoning. It's a large lot zoning. I believe it's 5 acres is the minimum lot size. Besides residential uses, there are a number of other activities, other uses that are permissible in one shape or another. Like I said, agricultural uses. This is our one zoning where agricultural uses are allowed by right. You can have kennels, vets, farm animals. You can have farmers markets as well. So there are some activities beyond just like estate kind of homes.
Okay. And could we, and I apologize if this is a dumb question, but can we clarify what, in layman's terms, what fees in lieu versus land dedication means?
Pay money or donate land is what that is, and just the simplest terms. And just to clarify that is, those options are there for the city to evaluate and determine what's appropriate. It's not a conditional use, it's not a variance, and it's fees in lieu is what the surrounding projects also did when they went through the approval process.
Got it. And I would also just ask for a little clarity on the variance for lot width. Could you maybe restate that, what that means for this project also?
So in simplest terms, if I recall correctly, the code says that the one unit is 75 feet and then 10 feet of lot width. Lot width is essentially measured at right angles across the property. This is a nice rectangular shaped piece of property. So what we see on the map here is just under 1,000 feet in width. So for all the units, the lot would have to be, not the entirety of the lot, it could be a small portion, but it would just be, at some point, the lot would have to extend, in this case, half a mile. And again, if we want to talk about, not to focus too much on what happened in the past, but developments, this code provision's been around for decades, and it's a frequent flyer for variances. So again, the two projects that we heard a lot of testimony from the residents, they also did not meet the lot width requirement as well.
Understood. And just maybe for comparison, and we might know this, we might not, do we know the density of Windward Trace or Amberley Village? Relative to building count, we think we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 26 buildings for one and
yeah, there's
22 for the other.
Let's see here. Might have some math here that I already did. Might not have. Let me see if I can see it in the code. Oh, I do. Windward Trace is 6.5 units an acre roughly, and Amberley Village is like 6.3. I did not calculate, obviously I don't have access to anything that's in Columbus, and I did not look at Cameron Ridge, which certainly would be a lot higher, but obviously that's a lot farther away as well.
Okay, thanks. And this development, if I go back in the presentation, is roughly 12 units an acre, is that, or?
It's just under 18, I think it was
Just under 18, okay.
17.96,
Thank you.
I believe.
Okay. And then lastly, this is for the applicant. Would any type of development on this site require wetland mitigation through Ohio EPA? Meaning, even if the plan as it's, developed today, if someone came and wanted to do, 4 houses, 1 house, whatever it is, would it still require wetland mitigation?
That's really challenging to say. If you flip to the site plan, I can kind of point out where the wetlands are, and you'll kind of understand. We actually did try to even look at options to avoid them, but it just didn't make sense. So the smaller of the 2 wetlands sits almost exactly where that center pond is behind the clubhouse. It's right in there, and I think it's about 0.6 acres in size. I don't have the map in front of me. The larger one basically encompasses the entire, from top to bottom, almost the entire right side of the plan there, sort of right about where our north-south drive is about where that one is, and it basically goes from front to back, varies in width, but it's right around that area. So to avoid them, especially the one in the middle becomes very challenging. We did look at trying to avoid the larger one on the right side and kind of load everything to the left side of this site. Really made access challenging, especially if we want to try to line up with that drive on the east end with the drive across the street, which is one of the locations they're considering a signal. It just really made for a very awkward development that didn't work. Can a different type of product go in there? Possibly. It's hard to say without really doing studies on what that product is.
Sure, okay. Thanks, those are my questions.
Thank you. And I just have one short one. We talked a little bit about the barrier on the 3 sides. Would that go up during construction, or would there be a temporary barrier during construction in order to mitigate dust and debris into the 2 communities?
There would be a temporary barrier that dealt with erosion, sediment, and also just a construction barrier. And then once we have plantings and everything in place where it's stabilized, then we would erect the fence.
The permanent one?
Yes, sir.
And the permanent one, you said, would be a privacy one. It would not be a metal chain link fence. It would be something more significant.
No. It is a solid fence. So it has 0 opacity.
So we had a lot of comments about, potential for crime, and many of the letters I got mentioned crime. You're going to have gates to get into the community. You're going to have fences on 3 sides of the community. There'll be no cut through. There'll be no drives. There'll be no way to walk through out of your community.
License plate
anywhere but
readers and
Morse Road.
cameras. We're really going to have a very aggressive, active security measures in place.
Thank you. Seeing no additional comments, we will close this portion of the meeting, and I will ask for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move to recommend approval to council of item Z-0001-2022.
I have a motion by Mr. Hicks. Do I have a second?
Second, Webster.
I have a second by Mr. Wester. Any discussion on the recommending of the zoning change to council? Only Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to start by thanking everyone that came out tonight and also complimenting those that are here and those that spoke. These meetings can be contentious, and they sometimes are. However, everyone in attendance was very respectful, very prepared, a lot of informative comments, and we could definitely tell your passion. So thank you. This is exactly why we have the public portion of our meetings. This is a great example of how it should work. This is also the first time I've seen signs in the audience, so kudos to whoever thought that up. Regarding the rezoning before us, this area, according to our land use plan, ideally would be mixed use. Understanding that the land use is a guide and not part of our code. Ideally, this would be a mixed-use project that was being proposed. If it's not mixed use, my second favorable rezoning request would be office, some sort of office type complex that is consistent with the properties to the west and properties to the east. My third favorite option would be multifamily residential, which is what we have before us. The least favorite zoning would be what it is today, which is the estate residential. So definitely agree with the comments that this will be developed at some point, that something will go in there. Our area is changing. We need this kind of product in Gahanna, and with what's happening to our neighbors to the east, our landscape is going to change. However, I'm going to be a no on the zoning application because of the first criteria that we have to consider, which is the consistency with the goals, policies, and the land use plan. In my opinion, this parcel would be better served as an office or some kind of mixed-use product. So, again, not opposed to what is being proposed, but at what's before us and the criteria that we're given, I will be a no vote on the rezoning application. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wester.
Well, I'd like to echo the comments relative to thanking everyone for coming out this evening and participating. Their input is certainly appreciated. I will be supporting the rezoning because I think it is consistent with the land use plan that makes recommendations. When you look at what Gahanna has experienced in the last 36 months, this commission has approved a couple of different apartment complexes, one on Johnstown Road, one on Morrison Road. That's where the real estate market is going. There were other questions that were asked that I believe the developer did a very good job of answering. I was pleased to hear that they will connect the water line. I think it's 1,000 foot. That will benefit not only this development, but it will help the citizens of Gahanna, the existing, in fact, the entire area. Probably completes a loop, I don't know. I'd have to look at the drawings. I agree with Mr. Hicks relative to zoning and what will be going in there. But if you look, it is primarily residential, and if you look across the street on the other side, and it is Columbus, probably very similar buildings in there. So I will be supporting the rezoning request.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm also in support of the rezoning. I think the owner has displayed in the past that he is a good developer. I think it does fit the site. And I do want to echo what Mr. Hicks said about the attendance tonight. I was given this for the very first time based upon the crowd that we saw. It made me very nervous to put a little clock on everybody, but thank goodness everybody has a phone because they kept themselves to the timer. And would like to say that I feel like this is Easter Sunday and Christmas Mass. Usually we're here and we only have 2 or 3 people in the audience. It's kind of nice to feel like a pastor and have a full crowd here, which is pretty good. But again, the rezoning has to be, to me, it has to be done so that we can get a more dialogue and a conversation going, which involves you in that process. And I am looking forward to seeing you back if this goes through. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Späka. Mr. Mago.
I'm also going to be voting in support of the rezoning case. I do want to, again, echo just what's been said about what took place here tonight from the public. I think all too often we see public meetings like this, public hearings, devolve into shouting matches, and that doesn't help the process and it doesn't help anyone. So I just want to thank you as the residents surrounding this property who came out tonight and spoke so passionately, and again, the decorum that you displayed was really refreshing to see. So thank you very much. I also want to give a shout out to city staff, to Mr. Blackford, for being very prepared in his remarks, in his presentation. In my daily job, I'm in his seat, so I know what he's going through and what he's feeling and how he comes prepared for this. So again, thank you very much for what you do. On the developer side, you definitely heard the concerns, you heard the feedback from your neighbors, and these are going to be your neighbors if this all comes to fruition. So I definitely want to kind of hold your feet to the fire that you take what you heard tonight and you incorporate those into your plans, because this is going to be a long-term thing, and it's going to be permanent, and we have to get this done correctly. We have to get this done right. So again, a lot of burden is going to be on you as a developer to take what you hear tonight and to incorporate it into your final plans. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Soriano.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to be in favor of the zoning change. I agree with Mr. Hicks. I think the question on the state residential, I don't think that's appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. I always start with what are we voting on tonight and what are we not voting on tonight, because it can get somewhat muddy if when we start to look at plans and we start to look at different things that help give us an idea of what could be there. But as the applicant stated, they're simply looking for some assurance or approval to be able to move forward to start to develop the plan and to start to develop what the buildings look like. So really tonight we're voting on the zoning change and then some of the planning criteria and variances that Mr. Blackford outlined, but we aren't voting on what it looks like. We're not voting on where the buildings go. We are really looking at that zoning change primarily in the conditional uses and variances. So some of the comments that have been made earlier about growth in our region, I've stated it previously. I think it's inevitable for where we are, the market, all the pressures that are being put on city of our metropolitan area in our suburbs. And so, growth is something that we are, having to deal with. And I think the question is whether we're going to be smart about our growth or not. I think that the probability of this site being developed as single family or even an office in some respects are probably very slim, just because of the economics that we see today, the pressures that are being put on the market with escalation, cost of things, cost of land, and that only is going to increase, which then in turn puts more pressure on the site to have more yield. And what's that do? It makes more buildings on the site. It pushes them up farther than they are today. And I have concern that would happen, because I don't think, as our land use plan states, 70 feet is a guideline for this site as a maximum. These buildings likely are going to be around between 30 and 40 at a maximum at 3 stories. I don't think 6-story project is appropriate at this site, and I only think that probability is going to go up as we go forward if this site doesn't get developed. So that's another reason for looking at the zoning. I would consider this site, when we look at, as Mr. Wester said, adjacent to us across the street. I would consider this medium density residential. I wouldn't consider this mixed use. The reason I think that's important is because mixed use, even though it might not be vertically integrated types of programs, like retail with residential on top or office and residential, hypothetically, if we have a mixed use project, that could actually increase the demand and intensity of the project on traffic, on parking, on all those other things. Retail and office can have a higher impact on that than residential does. So I'm more inclined to look at this as a medium density residential property as we have to our west and to our south than I am to look at it as a mixed use project. I would encourage, based on some of the comments tonight, as stated by some of my colleagues relative to, as we go forward with the plan, to the developer, to really look at, we have mature trees on the site. Those are really hard to come by. And I just want to reiterate the importance of maintaining as much of that landscape as we can, both as a natural feature, to Gahanna, but also just as a buffer between the new units and the existing units to our south. For those of you that brought up issues about shadowing, I think this will be vetted through as we start to look at design review and elevations, but just know that in our hemisphere, the sun comes from the south and southwest, so any shadows are going to be cast on the north side of the project, not towards the south. So for those of you that are concerned about that, I think that has less of an impact than you might suspect at first blush. So with all those things, I'm in favor of the zoning, and I won't make any further comments.
Thank you. Mr. Greenberg.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to commend you for running a good meeting tonight, and I'd like to commend the residents who came here, that this is what local government is all about, and we really appreciated coming out tonight and telling us your thoughts on the project. I, too, am going to support the zoning application because it follows close to our land use plan, and I'm thinking that down the road with the final development plan, we're going to have a lot of input and review to see how this project gets put together, and that's where the nuts and bolts of everything are going to come out. So it's down the road, not right now. So with that, I also agree with most of the comments made here by my colleagues. So I'll yield to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. And finally, I will also be in support. A number of reasons. First of all, State Residential 1 is just not relevant. My guess is at some point in time, Windward Trace and Amberley Village were State Residential 1. They got rezoned. And MRFD is the appropriate zoning for this. The State Residential 1, as Mr. Blackford said, 5-acre lots. There's 15 acres there. That would mean we could do 3 homes. I don't know what you guys are paying for this land, but I'm sure it's not feasible to put 3 homes on there. They won't even do that across the street in New Albany on land this valuable. So the rezoning makes sense. We're going to recommend it to council. I'm going to thank, we have 2 members of council with us tonight. Ms. Angelou and Ms. Padova in the back there are with us, and they will take it up from here. But thank you for attending tonight, and I'm sure other members of council are watching on the YouTube channel. As far as the $175,000 goes for parks, that is something that we do not vote on. That is administrative. But the city has mentioned they have no interest in putting a park there. This is not where our parks go. We have lots of parkland. We have great parkland in Columbus or in Gahanna. And, in this northern triangle is not conducive to parkland. The developer did say that they will enhance and maintain the sidewalk that is on Morse Road, and with the new construction on Morse Road, I think and hope that the sidewalks will be all the way from the roundabout to Hamilton Road, and people will be able on both sides of the street to be able to walk and ride bikes up and down Morse Road. And I think that's important for recreation. But as far as the parks go, the city and the park department is in agreement that the $175,000 is a much better solution. So with that, I will ask for a vote or a roll call.
Hicks,
No.
Wester,
Yes.
Mako,
Yes.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Chappaka,
Yes.
Siriano,
Yes.
Tamarkin.
Yes. Motion carries. Next, we'll go to conditional use.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Hicks.
I moved the approval of item CU-0006-2022.
I have a motion by Mr. Hicks. Do I have a second?
Second, Wester.
I have a second by Mr. Wester. Any discussion on the conditional use? Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the outcome of the recommendation to change the zoning, the criteria that we use to evaluate conditional uses are all met, so I will be supporting the conditional use application.
And I will also be in support. Many of us are privy to what's going on in Central Ohio. Miss Angela, who's in the audience tonight, city council member, is past president of MORPC, which does a lot of forward thinking for the region, the entire region, 7 or 8 counties. And one of the big needs of the area is housing. And nobody wants it in their backyard. 4 of us on this dais live further out Morse Road and fight the traffic every day. It's harder and harder to get in and out of our neighborhoods. But it's a fact of life. We can't make more land, we got to make more houses. And as the area continues to develop and it continues to grow, and Gahanna, which is very landlocked, it has limited parcels available, things are going to get more dense. And sometimes we have to watch what we ask for. We can turn this down, we could deny this application, and the next developer is going to come in and want to put a roosters in there or a sheets. And I understand that the conditional use of 18 resident units per acre is dense, and it's more dense than where you live, but it is appropriate for this lot. One of the things we fight here in this commission is developments on our 3 main roads. We have Johnstown, we have Hamilton, and we have Morse. And some of the parcels that are there, whether they're undeveloped or whether they're redeveloped parcels, they do back up to residential. And it's the toughest decisions we make as this committee on how to approve or not approve and what to do with the parcels along these 3 arteries, which are just geared for higher density and geared for commercial type developments. But in the neighborhoods are beautiful neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, peaceful neighborhoods, and it's a fine line. So I do think this is appropriate. As was mentioned earlier, we're going to ask the developer when we come back with the final development plan and the design review to be very respectful of the barriers, of the borders, of the fences, of the trees, of the water that all reside there. And with that, any additional comments? I'll ask the clerk to take a vote.
Hicks,
Yes.
Wester,
Yes.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Chappaka,
No.
Siriano,
Yes.
Tamarkin,
Yes.
Mako.
Yes.
Motion carries. And finally, do I have a motion for the variance?
Mr. Chair, I move the approval of item V-0023-2022.
I have a motion by Mr. Hicks. Do I have a second?
Second, Wester.
I have a second by Mr. Wester. Any discussions on the variance?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chappaka.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there's a, with the final development plan, I took note with not only what the public had to say, but I think that some of the variances might go away once they look at it. So I will not be supporting any of the variances at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Hicks?
There's one variance that I am kind of struggling with, and that's the expiration of the conditional use. I understand Mr. Blackford said that it's reasonable, and our zoning code probably will be edited to remove the 1-year expiration. I kind of like it. It gives us an opportunity for one more look after a year if something is being, if there's a pivot, if you will, we have an opportunity to address it at that time. So I kind of like the 1-year expiration. We've dealt with it rarely in the past, but I'm going to be a no for that this particular variance, understanding it's one vote on all the variances. The other variances I don't have a problem with, but that expiration of the conditional use, I'd like to keep that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to go on the record. I will be in support of the variances, but I would like to be on the record a variance that has not been asked for, but one that I would never support would be a variance to the 25-foot setback. So in your final development plans, when you come back to us, if you ask for a variance on that, I would be a no. I have walked, driven twice, walked twice, both Amberley Village and Windward Trace. I questioned the city if both of those were held to the 25-foot variance. It's very difficult to tell. Our records aren't real clear. Both were built in the 90s. My personal eye is that Windward Trace possibly had a variance or built into the variance, because it's hard to see that Windward Trace really has a 25-foot setback from the property line. So when you go home, take a look at that, see where, you can kind of tell where the grass is being cut at the property line. So if Windward Trace has 25 foot and this project is built as planned with 25 foot, there would be 50 feet, which is a pretty good gap between the properties. So I just wanted to address that. And if there's no additional comments, clerk, can we have a vote?
Hicks,
No.
Wester,
Yes.
Chappaka,
No.
Siriano,
Yes.
Tamarkin,
Yes.
Mako,
Yes.
Greenberg.
Yes.
Motion carries. And with that, again, it was a long meeting. I think it's a record in my tenure on here. I appreciate everybody coming out. I don't think, I hope you understand the decisions that were made. I know they didn't go exactly the way you wanted, but we certainly appreciate your comments. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing the final development plans from this. With that, we have a little more business to take care of, so if I can ask for, you're more than welcome to leave, but if we can ask for quiet as you're filing out. We will go to unfinished business. We have none. We will go to new business. We have none. Official reports. Assistant City Attorney, Mr. Roth.
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report. Mr. Blackford, Director of Planning.
Nothing tonight in the role of Director of Planning.
And City Council Liaison.
For City Council Liaison, I will just throw out there that on September 6th, there will be a vote on the 825 Tech Center city facility that I know Mr. Schultz gave a presentation at our last meeting. Again, September 6th is what we'd anticipate as a vote. We'd love to have folks attend and express your feelings about that project. So again, September 6th for a vote. Thank you.
Thank you. A few days after a big football game. Chair has no additional comments, other than I thought tonight's meeting was handled very professionally by all, including our community. Madam Mayor.
Yes, just briefly, I did echo the comments as well. Very professional meeting, and it was a difficult conversation. Appreciated the preparedness of not only Director Blackford, but the community members who came in, and as always, Planning Commission. Appreciated your patience and your openness and your consideration of the thoughts and opinions that were offered tonight. The only other thing I would add, just to keep you guys in the loop as well, Monday night at Council, we had a development agreement that was presented to Council to be voted on September 6th as well. It is a development project with Columbus Aesthetics and Plastic Surgery. They are an established medical practice over in Upper Arlington, looking to establish a second location here in Gahanna. They are plan to make a purchase of the Charles Penzone building that's situated at Morse and Cherry Bottom over there. Very difficult building to backfill, but great use for their purposes. They're making a significant investment, I think, of about $8.75 million in buying that building, and then extensive renovations as well. That business also will generate about $9.75 million of annual payroll. So looking forward to welcoming them, presuming that's voted upon by Council on the 6th to move forward. But that project will, if approved, will be coming before you as well.
Very good, thank you. Correspondence and actions. I actually did receive one correspondence. Tricia Kovacs, who is the bicycling representative, I think, for Gahanna, I don't know exactly how to describe her, sent an email only to me, because I met her at a city council meeting, asking if the Everett Park Apartments were going to have a sidewalk, which I should have asked Mr. Rubin. I think that's the Johntown Road project, correct?
I believe they are.
You're right, yeah.
I believe they are.
Yeah, it's a code requirement. Nowadays, it's a code requirement. That was changed about 6 years ago, I think, that sidewalks are required along frontage. Sidewalks or something similar, so it could be like a multi-purpose path. But yes, there will be something there, yeah.
Okay. And comments from our members? Yes, Ms. Angelou.
Thank you. I just want to say, this is probably the best panel I've ever seen. And I mean that in every way. This could have been so horrible, and it wasn't. People came and gave what they thought, and everybody, I think the applicants here are going to do everything they can to make this a good thing. So I want to thank you all. It was just terrific.
Thank you, Karen.
I'd throw kisses, but I'm not going to do it.
Thank you, and thank you for coming tonight. And Kaylee, thank you for coming tonight. Mr. Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on a very nicely managed meeting.
Thank you.
I think that was a reflection of your instruction and confidence, so, and part of why it ended up the way it did. Compliments to my commission members. It's refreshing, I think, to the public to see that even when we don't agree, we have a good conversation, good debate, good dialogue. So thanks for a good meeting to everyone.
Thank you. Mr.
I
Wester.
echo that, and I'd like to compliment Mr. Blackford on his presentation. Very good. I think it was a good meeting and it was a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's amazing to see the process work. I felt like, even though that all three, two of them didn't go in my favor, I think the process was here, it's evident, we use it, and I am truly humbled by the guys that are sitting to the left and right of me, of how they handle themselves and the questions that they ask and the foresight that they have. Every meeting is a learning experience for me, I feel. Sometimes I'm more like a comic relief than anything else in my own little head, but it was nice to see the process work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mago.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, just want to reiterate, I think what it's been said here tonight, this was, I think, done correctly. It could have gone off of the rails really at any point, but again, just good job to everyone. And being an optimist by nature, I do think that the final product we get is going to be something good. I'm just optimistic about this, and then, whenever I'm looking at a rezoning case, when it comes before me again in my professional life, if there's a red flag, I'm going to throw it, and I just don't see it in this case. But once we get down to the details, we'll just, again, like I said, we just hold these guys' feet to the fire, and I think we can make it work for not only that neighborhood, but for the whole community. So, again, good job.
Good, thank you. Mr. Soriano?
No additional comments. You all said it best. So.
Mr. Greenberg?
Well, I'll add, I think you did a great job as chair and everybody else as well as making comments. And I'm really looking forward to the final development plan, because I think out of most of the meetings that we have had over my tenure, the impact to that will show how this meeting went, and I think we will see many changes to the positive when they come back in front of us. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good, thank you. Thank you to everybody. I think we handled it well. It takes all of us, it takes the community. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn? We are adjourned.